Baldwin County Commissioners meeting, January 14th, 2020.
We should be ready. Good morning. Morning. It is 9 a.m. and we are here for a regular Tuesday morning board meeting for January 14th. So if we've got our full commission, Commissioner Peck, Didier, and Cook. We had our administrator, Ms. Johnson, and our clerk, Ms. Milham. And if you would join me for the pledge, please. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I think our first item on the agenda this morning is our legislative reps from Olympia. Excuse me. Mr. Potts and his grandson, Zach Kennedy.
Good morning, Mr. Potts. This is Keith Johnson at Franklin County with the Board of Commissioners.
Okay, I need to get Zach on here, and I'm not sure how I do that. Let me see. Oh, boy. I'm not very technically inclined with these phones.
Morning, Jim.
You want me to call his number?
Yeah, do that, and then he can merge it into me.
Okay, be right with you.
Well, good morning.
Good morning. This is the Franklin County Board of Commissioners meeting. This is Keith Johnson, the County Administrator.
Good morning, sir.
How are you today?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
Good. Just spoke to Jim, and he said you might be able to connect him on your phone there.
I can. Stand by.
Thank you.
That doesn't sound good. Let him call.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice message. 0999.
Good morning, gentlemen. You got it both.
Good. We love taking.
How are we doing down there in Franklin County today?
Very well, thank you.
Just a little skip of snow this morning. Zach and Jim, good morning.
Good morning. One of the things that we wanted to make sure that we let everybody know here is we're coming into this new short session. And of course, it's always the same every other year, but all the bills that were alive last year are alive again this year, dead or not, or it doesn't matter. They're all back, and we're going to see a few more. we're already starting to see, on that note, some title-only bills come out. So we're going to obviously keep an eye on those. We don't really know what they're going to end up doing or being, but the title-only stuff is definitely something that comes around right towards the end. So we will watch those. Actually, Representative Walsh has a bill that was pre-filed this year to do away with any title-only bills, so they can't, bring something up at the very end of session and populate that bill with whatever they think they need to do, and then push it through. It would actually, if this bill passes, would affect the budget process pretty dramatically because, right now what they do is they write all the budgets and then they bring those title-only bills to implement them. And they would not be able to do that under a new system if this bill passes. So definitely watching that.
Given the fact that Walsh is in the minority, the bill probably will not pass.
Most likely not. But we can get it introduced and, who knows, maybe it'll take 3 or 4 years and we'll get her done.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've been hearing from other counties that is kind of a new topic for us here is in regards to inmate insurance. And actually, Pend Oreille County Berry County brought it up to us. And it's right now how the system works. As soon as an inmate comes into your jail, you are now responsible for any of their insurance. And if they have state insurance, it goes away. If they have private insurance, you still have to insure them. And so one of the things they asked us to do was, look at that and see if there's anything that we might be able to start priming, in terms of a conversation where when inmates come into your jail, that you can actually take advantage of their existing insurance, whether it's a state insurance or a private insurance or anything like that. And to that note, if you guys were interested and had any numbers on what that costs you, providing insurance for inmates, that would be helpful in that pursuit. So some of the other stuff that's going on right now, we are watching, they started just yesterday around noon, so they haven't had a whole lot of a chance to do very much yet. They have had some rules pulled and in the Senate, and they're kind of moving forward with moving bills, but we don't really know what the tone of the session is going to be like here until probably later this week. And so we'll have a much more complete update for you guys in terms of what we think is going to move and what may not move coming here into early next week in our weekly report. So as we come into that, we will have more information. Is there anything in particular that you guys would like for us to pay special attention to and move along or watch, or any specific issues that we would like for us to bring attention to?
Well, I think as in the past, is OPD is going to be another large item for us.
Okay.
And then Senator Schessler was on our local radio the other day and talking about some bills being brought in on third reading where there can be no amendments to. Are there any thoughts on that? Or?
Well, if they pull the bill straight to the floor, then, yeah, they still do have to go to the other house, though.
But normally when they pull one to the floor, you can do floor amendments.
Okay. I misunderstood Mark then.
I know that the Democratic side has got this session on a fast track, and they got a big agenda, and they plan to run a lot of stuff through, and most of it's going to be pretty ugly.
That might be what he's talking about with no amendments, because they can pull, in both houses, they could pull something to the floor and not accept any of the Republican amendments.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is very possible. So, in fact, they don't even have to consider it. So that is kind of the tone of the session we're thinking this year. Like I said, there's a pretty big agenda, and they want to move a lot of stuff. Governor Inslee would like to put as much of rainy day fund as we possibly can towards homeless and underhoused. I'm not entirely sure what the politically correct word is this year. But I don't think that's going to be able to get done, but, we're definitely watching that because that's a lot of money that we could use elsewhere, and, it's mainly going downtown Seattle. So
Zach, this is Brad Peck. I'd like for you to keep a close eye on House Bill 2230.
okay.
It has to do with federally recognized tribes and what conditions that they live under with respect to taxation. And there's quite a few counties that are potentially affected. And in some cases, there's talk of PILT, payments in lieu of taxes, for burdens on communities. It's a fairly complex piece of legislation. Wasatch Legislative Steering Committee has taken a position in opposition, so it's all 39 counties. There are several others that I can get you the list from Wasatch, or you can get it directly. But there's also House Bill 1938, which is local infrastructure investment programs with respect to housing, workforce housing, revitalization efforts. I don't think it's the one you referred to earlier, but I'd ask you to take a look at that one. There are, as you know, literally thousands of bills that come up every year, the ones that are recycled and new bills. So there will be more, but for now I'd ask you to keep an eye on those. And then, as always, any of the firearms-related bills have always been of high interest, both to myself and my fellow commissioners, so keep an eye on those too, please.
We absolutely will, and I'll make sure that, as we've done in the past, any of the firearms bills that we've had, I've kind of had a separate little section for that in the reports. I'll make sure we do that again this year for you guys.
Gentlemen, along that line, our governor signed 6 bills. Was it 6 bills, or what were they? The 6 signed gun. I guess they had to be bills, wasn't they? That he just signed into law. One of them is every gun from a .22 on up is considered now a illegal weapon.
All the
He signed 6 gun bills.
things.
Yes, the assault weapon ban. He signed 6 pieces of legislation. Were these out of his office, or were these passed by the legislature that he signed?
They had to be passed by the legislature.
They were passed by the legislature.
He can't sign a bill unless it's passed by the legislature.
He doesn't have an executive power on that because it's our Second Amendment right, correct?
Right.
Okay, now Matt Shea. I see numerous counties are now coming in support of Matt Shea. Can you tell us has anything transpired on so far there with that?
Well, none of our counties have mentioned it. You're the first county that's mentioned the situation.
I've already seen some resolutions that they have signed.
I've heard that they're out there, but what I'm saying is nobody has mentioned it to us.
Okay.
I think they're very much in limbo as to how they want to handle all this. They have stripped him of all his committees and trying to basically render him kind of useless. He's not in a caucus anymore. And so I don't know how it's all going to shake out, but I'm sure that in the next week or so we will hear about it and what they plan to do.
Any words or direction that you want to tell us here as a board to help him out, because he is one of our staunchest conservative members over there?
Well, I hear a lot of things, Clint, but nothing that I think is very concrete. And so, I think at this point it's all speculation, and so I think we just have to kind of take a wait and see as to what's happening here in the next few days.
Okay. And the last item I have here is I-976. Of course, you know that there is a February 7th court date. How is the legislature handling this? How are they preparing for this? Because it could very well
be removed from King County because of the conflict of interest and put in another jurisdiction where it could be ruled law, which means that they're going to be hurt with this loss of funds.
You know, I think at this point, what they're doing is they're just trying to do as much as they can to address the constitutionality of it. And I haven't looked into it to see exactly what the legal question is right now. I'd have to look a little bit more.
Okay. All right.
We'll follow that.
I do know that the Republicans are all saying that the voters have spoken and it should stand.
Yeah, I don't know how they can have their cake and eat it too with 1639, which is an initiative to overrule a Second Amendment, which is clearly not really, it's not the way it's supposed to be done. But here, this is basically car tabs, which can be done, and they rule this one and file a lawsuit against it. But 1639 they uphold, so I see a conflict of interest there also.
I also heard this morning that a number of Democrats have filed something, a brief or something into the courts yesterday, looking into to see if they can overrule the Constitution on a state income tax. So I think we're in quite a ride this session, and we're going to have to be watching all the time, and hopefully we can stop some things, but I don't know, it's going to be I don't see it being a very pretty session.
Yeah, we could see a lot more legal questions after the end of this session, I think.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks for taking your time today, but if something comes up, don't hesitate to send us an email that if we can help from this end.
Absolutely.
And likewise, when you see something, notify us.
Yeah. Great.
Call or email or text anytime.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Talk to you next time.
All right. All right. Our next item on the agenda is Becky. There she is. You're with us this morning. I didn't see you at first. We have basically a proclamation for you, but on behalf of Franklin County, I'd like to express our gratitude for your faithful service as administrative accountant of the treasurer since June 6 of 1997. Your contribution to the county and years of your service have been invaluable. Please accept this certificate of appreciation for your dedication and professionalism. We hope you know how much we respect and have valued your calling. You will be missed by Franklin County. Thank you.
I said, at least you don't have to take pictures with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to say it's a great opportunity for me to work with everybody, and it's a very wonderful, sharing crew that we have at Franklin County, and they're very supportive. And
Yeah.
but I've been writing a journal from then and now. I do a big book.
That's right.
Thank you, Becky.
Thanks.
That brings us on to Derek. You have a closed record hearing for us today.
Thank you, Chair Cook. I apologize. I've got whatever.
Bring that mic
Okay.
closer to you.
My voice is going, so I'll try to be brief. This is a request for a conditional use permit. Still not enough. Boy, you got to really get into it. Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, before we get rolling here, excuse me, Derek.
Sure.
I'm going to step out. I recused myself when this issue first came before the board because I own a potentially competing event center, and I don't want to give the impression that there might be any bias or consideration that way. But before I step out, Keith, maybe you and Derek and I could get together after this matter has been resolved, and I've got some feedback for you on the process with respect to the ASR. A person not well acquainted with the closed record hearing process could easily get sidetracked and head off into discussions that are not proper for a closed record hearing. So it's an administrative matter. It doesn't have anything to do with the content. We can bring it up after this is all resolved. But for now, I'm just going to step out so we don't have any questions.
This is a separate application than the last one, so it is a different request.
That was going to be one of my questions. I thought we had talked about this.
This was a unusual circumstance where the first, we'll say COP 05 came in, then 3 weeks later, another person in the same neighborhood came in. Staff does not have the authority to deny or approve applications or interfere with the due process. Staff did strongly recommend that this was not a likely event that just a timing thing. Two different people came in from the same area, going for the same thing about 3 weeks apart. And so this is a separate application from a completely separate entity. And it's one of those, when somebody comes in, there's nothing that prohibits their right to apply for the conditional use permit.
Sure.
Staff can only let them know that but even then, staff can't really speak to, because we never know. So she was informed that this was going to be a very heavy lift if it was going to be approved. She desired to proceed anyways, and this is where we are today.
Thanks for the explanation.
Yeah, I try very hard to give a rough estimate as to the likelihood of things. I always let folks know, though, that I don't have that jurisdictional authority one way or the other, but please be advised, these are the hurdles you're going to need to overcome, and then it's up to the applicant as to whether or not they want to move forward or try to go over those hurdles or even successfully get over them. That staff, when you look, anyways, I tried to keep them also separate. I try not to do comparisons between the two. This is a different application that came in about 3 to 4 weeks at the request of the applicant, due to how the previous one had gone. We did a delay, so there'd be some time between the two. That's why it's also processed longer, why we're seeing it today, not like just last month or something like that. But again, the recommendation was the same from the Planning Commission for denial, and staff does support that recommendation based on the information and comments received at the hearing. So I'm going, if it's okay, read from the ASR, and then so we get this in the record. So the closed record quasi-judicial closed record hearing for a conditional use permit to allow an outdoor event center in accordance with Franklin County Code Section 17.14040D, public and quasi-public buildings. File numbers, conditional use permit 2019-06 and SEPA 2019-10. So, as mentioned, Ms. Garibay came in, requested a conditional use permit for an event center. The proposed use of this type lies between item D, a public quasi-public buildings, and item I, ancillary services such as tasting rooms, facilities, and event centers associated with a winery, distillery, regarding intensity of use. So when a specific thing is not listed on our table of uses, staff makes a kind of, guesstimate of where its closest application is. In this case, like I said, and it's based on an intensity of impact. So we have two scenarios that could potentially be allowed. That's why this is not a flat-out denial or something like that. The applicant proposes to use approximately 20,550 square feet of a just over 1 acre site, which would include portable restrooms, banquet tents for the specific events and parking spaces. The proposal would include outdoor lighting at the site until 10 p.m. when events take place. Property where the project is proposed is zoned RR1 and carries a rural residential land use designation. The property is located in the area known as Clark's Addition. Planning staff provided the Planning Commission with a written recommendation of approval for the application because, again, based on the evidence, it was depending on the mitigation conditions and things like that that were able to be implemented or required. If the applicant could fulfill those, then so be it. There was no reason not to make that recommendation. That recommendation comes out before we receive most or all of the public comment. So it's based on really just the facts, the rules, things like that. Staff does not try to predict what the community's opinion is going to be of a case, so therefore it is not part of their initial recommendation. Subsequently, at the November 12th, 2019 meeting, the Planning Commission held a duly advertised open record public hearing and unanimously passed a motion 4-0 to forward a recommendation of denial with 6 suggested findings of fact as amended by the Planning Commission. This was due to the public testimony where we had 14 speakers plus 2 letters and an email all in opposition. The applicant did provide a petition with their application signed by 8 immediate neighbors in support of the proposal, 2 of which offered their property for overflow parking if needed. However, as mentioned, there was pretty overwhelming lack of support in the immediate area, just similar to the previous or the 2 other applications of this sort in the community in that neighborhood. So the recommendation, staff does support Planning Commission recommendation of a denial. In your packet, you were provided basically a fact sheet staff summary. I'm going to start trying to keep that so that it summarizes the packet, but you'll still have all the packet information if you want to dig deeper. So findings of fact that were used by the Planning Commission to make their recommendation is the proposal is in accordance with the goals, policies, objectives, maps, and or narrative text of the comp plan. The proposal will or will not adversely affect public infrastructure. The proposal will or will not be constructed, maintained, and operated to be in harmony with the existing or intended character of the general vicinity. Location and event height of a proposed structures and site design will discourage the development of permitted uses on properties in the general vicinity or impair the value thereof. The operation in connection with the proposal will be more objectionable to nearby properties by reason of noise, fumes, vibration, traffic, or flashing lights than would be in the operation of any permitted uses within the district. And or the proposal will endanger the public health or safety if located and developed or proposed, or in any way will become a nuisance to uses permitted in the district. At the November 12th meeting, the Planning Commission discussed the proposal, the comments made, the record as provided, and the findings of fact. A motion was made for a recommendation of denial. And to the Franklin County Board of Commissioners for application CUP 2019-06 with alternative findings of fact as provided below. And so, based on the Planning Commission, and it's not in accordance with the goals, policies of the county. The use outdoor event center is not specifically listed as a use that is allowed or prohibited in the RR1 zone as such, as provided for in Franklin County Code 17.66.210. The Planning Commission makes a determination as to whether the proposed use is similar to and not more objectionable than the use specifically permitted. The Planning Commission has determined that an outdoor event center as proposed will be more intense of a use than an event center ancillary service associated with a winery, distillery, or brewery. This is basically because in the case of a winery or whatever, generally, if not all, the majority of that type of an event center tends to be indoors, and things like that. And there just wasn't any, that was not going to happen. It was all tents and everything would be outside effectively. The proposal will adversely affect public infrastructure. Whereas we didn't really get this comment on the first one, but as proposed, the site can only accommodate 67 people for an event based on its water availability unless it was negotiated with the water provider. The water provider is for residential. This is according to the water provider, is for residential use, not commercial. So the likelihood of that was not very likely.
Is that a Clark Edition water system?
Yeah, she's on that, whereas the first applicant was not. So that was a little bit different there. The proposal will not be constructed, maintained, and operated to be in harmony with existing or intended character. Generally speaking, yeah, it could be compatible because it would go up and down. But and the reality is the residential activity is the primary use in the area, and small hobby farming. Commercial activities generating high traffic volumes and noise are not compatible with the expectations of residential use and hobby farming in the area. The location, though, there were no permanent, number 4, in location and height, proposed tent structures and site design will discourage the development of permitted uses on property in the general vicinity or impair the value thereof. Though no permanent structures were really recommended, the popping of the tents up and down, and then the activities generating more than residential traffic, again, in an area designed for residential uses. The operation in connection with the proposal will be more objectionable to nearby properties for reason of noise, fume, vibration, dust, traffic, flashing lights. The Planning Commission has determined that an outdoor center will be more intense of a use than an event center ancillary service, as mentioned before, as it was proposed. The proposal will endanger the public health, safety, or general welfare located where, as provided in the Benton Franklin Health District letter comment, the site can only accommodate up to 67. The proposal for up to 200 without approval. And again, it appears that the water purveyor was not willing to grant that approval. Therefore, it would have been unhealthy on the site. And so staff's recommended motion is that the Board of County Commissioners adopt the recommendation of the Planning Commission and deny CUP 2019-06 based upon the written findings of fact.
Questions?
I just want to clarify the reason why it is 2019-06 is because this was presented last year.
Correct. Yes, this started, and like I said, in November was when it went to the Planning Commission. Then, just to give things some time to cool down.
Just to clarify why it is 2019
right,
and not 2020.
Right. We'll see that for a few items potentially for the next couple months, maybe.
I really don't have any questions because this falls right in line with the last one and the Clark edition, and with the clarification of the water. That would mean we'd have to have somebody sitting there to count people to make sure they didn't get over 67. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board of Commissioners adopt the recommendation of the Planning Commission and deny conditional use permit 2019-06 based upon the written findings of the fact.
I'll second. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Gary, thank you.
Good luck with that voice.
Yeah. Give it a workout. Yeah. Our next item on the agenda is Two River Health District. Mr. Kerr.
Right here?
Yeah, that'd be good up there by the mic. And
I think we need the other commissioner back.
yeah, somebody could get. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Morning. You ready?
All right, please.
Okay. Again, good morning, Commissioner Peck, Didier, and Chairman Cook. I do want to thank you for taking time to hear from us about the need and potential for a full-service central recovery facility for the Greater Tri-Cities. I am not Lee Kerr.
Yeah.
I am the current, I'm a Kennewick Public Hospital District Commissioner and a current board president. One thing that commissioners have a responsibility for is hire a really good superintendent. We did that. Lee Kerr is fantastic. He's going to be having a performance evaluation when he returns from Fiji, where I just spoke to him this morning. Our timing was to try to do this before he was able to take on his long journey to Fiji, Auckland, and New Zealand for 2 months. So anyway, he's much more articulate than I am, but they did trust me to maybe do this right. There's a group with me today, and they are sitting over there. It's Dr. Cindy Pressler. She's with Grace Clinic, and additionally, she's a board member of the Ben Franklin Recovery Coalition. Alongside her is Jason Bliss. He's with Oxford Houses, and he's also a current board member of the coalition. And also, where did Joel go? Joel, he won't sit with us, so he's in the back, and I think you all are familiar with Joel. He's also a member of the Benton Franklin Recovery Coalition. Now, just so everybody knows, these are the professionals and experts, not me, and so they're here to help answer any questions you might have, but they truly understand the urgency and need for a full recovery facility in the Greater Tri-Cities. But the reason we are here today is to ask Franklin County to support and share in the cost to determine the feasibility of establishing this full-service recovery center, which would be at the Trios Auburn Street Hospital campus. That campus right now is the birthing center. Trios has looked at moving that birthing center out to Southridge, which would leave that facility available. And the purpose of it then would be to meet the needs for withdrawal management, wraparound services for recovery support, rehabilitation, crisis intervention, pediatric transition, and diversion services, along with some other areas that are being discussed now that would kind of tie this in with behavioral health issues and other things associated with that.
Did I miss this? This is the old Kennewick Hospital?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
And there's two studies that we need to do to determine the feasibility of that feasibility. And with that, with those reports, they'd be essential then in securing funding for that facility. One of the studies is being done by Arculus. They're a local architect firm, and they're going to determine the remodel and other required capital costs of converting the current facility into a full-service center. The other study is being done by Ascension, a firm out of, I believe it's West Virginia, or Virginia, someplace, and they're very, very experienced in doing recovery startups and the development of these types of centers. And their role and responsibility is to determine the full requirements that for this center, which would include code requirements, staffing, state and federal operating requirements, ongoing and operating expenses. They would also provide a conservative estimate on the revenue for the service to be provided and a conservative estimate of the patient census on an annual basis. Along with that, we would be provided a breakdown of the revenues based on the payer mix, which would include Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, and individual payers. The cost of the two studies is approximately $46,000 to $50,000. The district, the Kennewick Public Hospital District, is funding half of those costs. And the reason that we're asking to share in those costs with the two counties, Benton and Franklin, is we want to make sure that there is full community support for this and to make sure we are headed forward on a sustainable path. And what we're asking from Franklin County is for an amount up to $12,500, which would be approximately a quarter of the cost if it goes to $50,000. Our hope right now is it would be $46,000. We would bill you for a quarter of the cost on completion of the study. And additionally, at the completion of these studies, you'd be provided a copy of that, and then if you wanted, we could also come in and do a full presentation as far as what the studies have indicated and what the next steps would be. And we also have a handout if you'd like it. And then additionally, do you have any questions?
I'll start. Arculus and Ascension are both contractors that do advisory kind of professional work?
That is correct.
Okay. And neither one of them have a potential future role in owning or operating the facility?
That is correct.
And the arrangement for acquiring their services, I'm guessing, doesn't require any sort of a public bid process because you're a nonprofit hospital district. I don't know that that's the case. But I'm wondering, and I know our legal counsel is sitting in the room, I didn't see this go through a civil legal review. And so one of my questions is whether or not we've vetted the use of public funds for the idea, for the concept. On the surface, I don't see any outward conflicts. Coming in today, I thought that Ascension was an operator of these kinds of facilities, and that did concern me.
Yeah, not the same Ascension. We thought
right.
when they provided a proposal, we kind of started thinking the same thing.
Right. If it were a for-profit entity that was going to benefit from public funds from this study, clearly that would be a problem.
And we agree.
Right. And the only other concern that comes to mind right now is that budgets are tight, and if the board did elect to support, I'd sure feel more comfortable with something that was an amount certain, not a quarter share of whatever the bill ends up being.
Okay. Well, the amount certain is $12,500. Right. It will not exceed that.
Okay. Because I think I heard you say that the bid was about $46,000. You hoped that it would stay under $50,000, and that our share would be a quarter. So I
okay. No, the district will be responsible for anything beyond the $50,000. That's the max amount that you would be committed to.
And I don't know that I'm at a point to support or not, but I wanted to get those kinds of initial questions out of the way, and now I'll hear what my fellow commissioners have to say.
Just a quick follow-up on the question. We have already contracted for their services, but we've also told them that if we don't get community support, we've paid for $23,000 to date. We will stop the process if we don't get support. That's how far we are. And Lee Kerr, our superintendent, and our staff attorney Heidi Ellard with the Holmgren firm has reviewed everything that we're doing, and it does meet what we believe to be the requirements of the public entities, and we're under the very same rules that you are.
You probably are under a few that we're not. And
yes, that would be
versa.
correct.
We probably have a few of our own as well. I do want to just add that I think the concept of what you're doing, and especially the repurposing of that facility, I think it's all great. There's clearly a need. I would have imagined that this is something that the state of Washington would have happily funded.
There are indications of considerable opportunities for funding. We've been in contact with a fellow by the name of Steve Pennington from Department of Health, State of Washington.
Right.
He's extremely enthused about it. He's done a walk through the facility and says, hey, this needs to happen.
Well, my preference would be certainly that you ask the state to fund this study. We sometimes talk about budget dust in Olympia. This isn't even budget dust for them, and I think that they'd probably be happy to pay the bill.
It would be very complicated, and again, going back to what our commission has decided or determined is, hey, this needs to be done. They've been encouraged to support it, but what they did ask is, as we go forward, that we will fund up to half, but we'd like to see community support from the two counties.
Have you discussed this with Benton County yet?
Just we're setting up to have a meeting with their commission. We did have a brief discussion with them, and early indications is support.
Yeah. Well,
on an individual basis. I've not met with commissioners, maybe only one-on-one.
I guess my thoughts is that at risk between Benton and Franklin County, like our human services and juvenile justice, it's based on the at-risk population, and we're about 30%, with Benton County being 70%. So that's what I was wondering if there's any thoughts or discussions on that.
Yes, I had heard that, but our sense is that because this is just the beginning of the process, would rather wait and use those proportional share things as if there need be as we would move forward.
Okay. I think we have the sheriff must have a.
Well, maybe it'll be a little bit helpful is law enforcement in particular. I'm also sitting on the board, the coalition boards, and some of those type of things to try to address the community issue. The community issue is that we have a homeless population, we have a mentally ill population, we have a substance abuse population, and we have an alcoholism problem. And what we don't have is we don't have social detox, we don't have secure bed space, we don't have unsecure bed space, and we don't have a way to address those issues to, one, tie or stop people from coming into our jails where we don't have the ability to do such things to help them out and to make it work. So there's been an ongoing discussion to the point that the KGH, the old KGH hospital, has been identified as a possible solution to that problem, and it's been ongoing for a while. Personally, from both sheriff's standpoints, we believe it to be a viable option to help with our problems within our own community. You're not reinventing or building new construction or those type of issues. It looks like an economical way to at least see if it's a viable option. So to this point where it's at is it a viable option? And we have to look at it and do the studies in order to say, yes, it is viable or it's not viable. It's not about increasing taxes or any of those type of issues. It's just about, is there community support for this to take place to see if it's a viable option. And basically what I'm telling you is from the professional community throughout the Tri-Cities, there is support. And I would imagine that if we started marching people in one by one, you would hear that there is support to at least look at it as a viable option for the Tri-Cities. How it goes past that, obviously it's up to you gentlemen and the Benton County commissioners to make those decisions. But it's money well spent to see if it's a way to address the problems that are continuing in our communities and continuing to build those populations. And at least we have some sort of viable bed spaces to address those issues here locally, if we at least look at it to see if it is such an issue. So I've got to go to a meeting, so I put my 10 cents forward. So thank you.
So, Sheriff, if I may ask you one question before you leave. Right now, when an inmate comes in and he's substance abuse and you start him on the program, is there any place that you're shipping to after you've started the process? There's no place?
Nope.
So,
Nope.
Gary, if I may call you Gary, where is the closest proximity of these type of facilities to us right now?
It's either road-wise, and you can help me out here, it's either Spokane or Wenatchee. Is that correct?
There's not one in Yakima? Is it Yakima or Zilla?
Not
It's Yakima.
court related. So if you're in the jails and you're in the system, for lack
Mhm.
of better words, there is no place locally, Yakima or anywhere where we send. The courts actually tell us where to send them, either to Eastern or to Western.
So Yakima Sheriff and Spokane Sheriff doesn't send them to these facilities either?
No, to private facilities, no, or to public health facilities in this instance, no.
So it still wouldn't be an avenue. It wouldn't be an avenue for them to further their rehab.
No, it'd be an avenue not to bring them to jail.
But if they've committed a
in other words,
crime-
if an officer or deputy arrests somebody with some sort of substance abuse or those type of abuses, then we can actually divert them to such a place, to such a program to be evaluated, et cetera, before we bring them to jail, versus bring them to jail and let them sit in a holding cell or somewhere for. Sean could probably give you better averages how long it takes to get people into secure bed space to be evaluated. But my experience, at least watching the jail population, sometimes it's 90 days to, I want to say 6 months before we get them moved sometimes. And a facility such as this would probably help us relieve a lot of that, which is probably going to be more cost effective for the taxpayer than keeping them in jail versus into a public health facility like this.
Okay. Well, I know for a fact that I've talked to a couple mothers, and they've lost their children to substance abuse, and they wish there was a facility like this. They would have gladly have paid to enroll their kids in this. So I've heard that firsthand. We've learned the closest facilities. The one thing I worry about is if we do create this, are we going to become a magnet for the state to start shipping us their problems?
Well, our intent is for this to be a facility for the greater Tri-City area.
For the local community.
Right. And it does provide a means with which the sheriff and other local police authorities would have a place to take them to in a secured area. You know,
Right.
there's a good drop-off secure
My next
area.
question.
There's a secured recovery area that those folks would be placed in. It would have both secured and unsecured recovery centers.
Right. And in a secured area, would there be an apparatus to check visitation right people
Correct,
coming
yes.
in? So
Yes.
that
It's a fully secured area where entry in and out is controlled. And I know there's been a lot of questions about, well, what's preventing them from bringing drugs in? That there will be a good screening process there. We have talked to some folks that they have some really elaborate screening processes as you go into some judicial areas, but very expensive, like $250,000. It checks everything. One I don't want to walk through, by the way. Rather embarrassing, I think.
Likewise.
Further thoughts or
just,
questions?
Just a kind of a follow-up. I have for years advocated for some form of triage facility where law enforcement could take a potential offender, and I say potential because sometimes people are picked up by law enforcement on the street because they're acting in what society might call an aberrant way, and law enforcement doesn't always have the skill set or the time or the wherewithal to diagnose a person as to whether or not they've got a mental illness, whether they're on illegal drugs, whether there's something else going on. And the ability to take them somewhere where they can be seen by competent authority and triaged into an alternate facility rather than taking them to jail and stripping them of their identity by giving them a jumpsuit, taking away their meds, and isolating them, which are probably two to three of the worst things you can do to somebody in crisis. So I certainly get the facility, and I agree that there's a need. For me, the question really revolves around what is the proper role for the county to play? Are we participant? Are we customer? Where do we fit? And we've got a professional human services department that is bi-county that looks to and advises us on our role and programs and facilities, and in fact has funding mechanisms for a variety of programs, some of it locally funded, most of it state funded. So I'd be keen on hearing from Human Services if there's any thoughts. The 12,500, frankly, is likely to be less than a drop in the bucket if this goes forward, given the costs of creating and operating a facility like that. And I would offer that if the purpose of the 12,500 is a demonstration of support, I would think that the consensus or a proclamation from the Board of Commissioners ought to be just as convincing. Awful lot of things that demand our funding and our attention. Kyle, do you have any thoughts on anything I brought up or anything related to this that you'd want to share?
Yeah,
and just to be clear, we haven't discussed this previously.
No.
I'm not trying to set you up. I just
no, and
like
I think I could, I don't know that I would be prepared right now to go too far in depth, other than to say that I think the services that have been talked about that would be provided to add a facility like this are services that we don't have and services that our community needs. Whether or not the Trios building is the right place for that, whether it's going to be economically sound and be able to be sustainable, I don't know. And I think my impression of the feasibility study is that, and my hope it would answer those questions. And then I think we could have maybe a larger discussion about some of the concerns, Commissioner Dater, that you brought up about other communities accessing it and what all scope. It's a big facility, and so I think there are a lot of things that can be done there, providing financially it's providing, we wouldn't want anything that's going to fail, and so we want to make sure that if we do go in this route, that it's something that will be viable. And I have no doubt that the services are needed. It gets a little ridiculous with this area, the size of our area. We don't have even a detox center.
Is it possible that Human Services, out of the various state grant and local funds, could fund this? I'm increasingly a little concerned that you're not kind of right in the middle of this process, because you're the director for our Bi-County Human Services, and I think I'm going to look heavily to you to see. I mean, it sounds like we're on the same page with respect to that there's a need, and the study answers whether or not this is a viable group and a viable path. But I'm a little concerned that it's not seen more time in your office.
Yeah, and I did participate in a meeting at the end of last week with this group, and I have participated in the Recovery Coalition meetings and been a part of that, and we've identified, and this I think sprung from kind of our biggest obvious gap right now is the lack of a detox facility. When Lords was no longer to provide that service, so I've been more involved from a peripheral.
We're on the same page, I think, in terms of the need. I haven't heard anybody say, "Oh, we don't need that."
Right.
It's clear we do. I'm trying to look to the proper role for the counties and how that's executed. And sorry if that sounds too process oriented, but
no.
we've just turned our entire Human Services program upside down in how we run it, right?
Right.
And to then step outside of that process and those agreements that we've created recently with Benton County seems awkward at best. And so I would prefer, if we were going to do this, to see the funding coming from the both counties on a pro rata share based on population at risk, because I don't think you demonstrate any more commitment by 20,000 than you do 10,000. Either you're in or you're not.
Sure.
But I would prefer to go through your office and be on a pro rata share if we're going to do it.
Yeah, and and again, I think in terms of if the board decides to do this, I think the funding could potentially be come from the millage fund. I think there has to be the mental health tie-in, though. It's and I think there has been talk about the facility in different phases and the potential for crisis services to be provided out of that facility. So I think there's enough of a tie-in.
You're certainly authorized to expend funds to investigate solutions.
Okay.
I don't think there's any question about that.
Okay.
So let me ask you this along those lines. The square footage of the building?
Where's Lee at? No, it's like 54,000.
And how many floors is on?
Two.
2 floors?
2 main floors.
54,000.
Now, half of it currently is a birthing center.
Right.
The other half is where it would start. But there's potential for the additional part of that to provide residential areas, and there's a lot of different discussions that we've been having on what the future that would be, like a Betty Ford facility. So the potential for that is very good.
With that kind of square footage, wouldn't there also be a potential for aiding in the homeless?
I think there's a lot of things that the facility, I think there could be a number of, there could be, it is a big facility. There could be step down, and one of the conversations we kind of went a little deeper in the meeting that I participated in last week with some of the potential future services that could be provided there. Again, from a mental health standpoint, we have individuals that sit in the state hospital that can't be discharged to the street, but they're psychiatrically stable, waiting for a discharge place. I think there's a lot of potential for the facility.
So if we were to do this initial investment, how much do you think we're tied to in operating and maintenance of it? Would this all be paid for with grant money from the state, or are we going to be on the hook for funding this?
That is going to occur and be understood after we get the feasibility study done and what the dollars are. And it's going to determine what the revenue sources are going to be. Based on that, if there's a shortfall in what the revenue would be based on a conservative estimate of that, and we'll know what the full expenses are, then we're going to go back to, okay, what do we do next?
And that last question is why I earlier said, what's the county's role? Are we going to be an owner? Are we going to be an operator? Are we going to be a client, a customer? And maybe that in part is what the study looks at. But that's why, Kyle, I'd be much more comfortable if you were front and center point guy for the two counties, and if we were to fund a study, that it would be coming out of the Human Services budget, and hopefully a call or a note to the state would yield a grant. I can't imagine the state not jumping on the opportunity for a market our size that has an absence of services to not want to weigh in and see where this goes. But I am concerned about downstream. What is our status? I don't want us, frankly, to be an owner in this thing. I want us to be, at least based on my initial impressions, a service recipient, not unlike we've been with Lords and others in the past.
Right.
It's just too open-ended. It's too much fiscal and other liability for the people.
Yeah, and I don't believe there had been conversation about the county's owning
No,
the facility.
I understand.
Okay.
I'm just putting some light on
Sure.
that
Yeah,
point.
no, I get it.
No one has told me that was the
Actually, just a little bit of a correction. There originally was a discussion that says, hey, do we want to create a joint operating agency with the hospital, the counties, and that has been dispelled as a notion and an idea.
Well, the state's got a nifty little 1957 joint operating agency law that works well for some and not for others. You remember trying to build 5 new plants?
I used to work for the PUD, so don't bring that one up too, please.
I used to work for the commercial nuclear reactor folks. So,
Oh, okay.
So we both know that history.
Exactly.
JOAs work sometimes, not always.
Sometimes not great.
So my preference, Mr. Chair, would be that Kyle look into this just a little further in terms of Human Services' role and their ability to secure money from the state to help with the funding for this study. And if not, maybe recommendation for funding out of our local homeless and other housing funds. I'm interested in learning more, and the study is done by competent professionals as part of the process in doing that. I just like the roles and responsibilities a little more defined before we get too committed.
Yeah. What I understand, though, is we're all in support of it, so of the concept.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, Kyle, where do we pick the check up? I'm just kidding. Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.
I'm looking for Kyle to come back in about a week and say, yeah, we can fund it out of our office, and we'll track it and let you know how it goes. That may not be his recommendation, but.
Yeah. With that, I believe Kyle is up, so he sat down too rapidly. Good morning, Kyle.
Good morning. So I came to you today to talk about a program, a proposed facility built by Catholic Charities, the Spokane Diocese, which reaches all of Franklin County. And so I was approached prior to Christmas from the team with Catholic Charities requesting that a representative from the county sign a certificate of, I can't remember what it's called, certificate of
consistency with the 10-year plan?
Yes. And for this proposed project, and it's, I think you've probably heard about the building that they're looking at doing. They've got 3 of them in Spokane. It's a 50-unit complex with supported housing, so they staff the facility. There's office space on the main floor for individuals from the community mental health, SUD programs to come in and provide treatment services there. It's the facility is specific to our community's residents. My office would be doing the screening for individuals that would be leading into that would be eligible for not admission, but being able to live there and participate.
Would those be compensated services? In other words, would your office be compensated for the time to do those services?
Well, we are. That's part of. We are compensated from. It would be part of our coordinated entry services through the state.
Potentially a workload increase.
It is. There are individuals typically that we see anyway. We would just have a place to put them.
Okay. All right.
And so the certificate of consistency is a requirement for they pay for it fully out of grant funding and tax credit dollars. And so they're in the process of filling out their tax credit application, and a requirement from that is a certificate of consistency with the plan to end homelessness.
So I'm familiar with tax credit programs for a variety of things, from historic preservation to other stuff, but not with respect to this. Can you just educate me a little bit when you say tax credit dollars?
Yeah, I don't know that I'll be able to.
Okay.
My understanding.
I'm going to assume that it's similar to the others, and we'll just.
And I don't have a full understanding. I know that the executive director for the Kennewick Housing Authority has historically used tax credit programs to build units, to get units for people that are below the poverty line. And so outside of that, I could certainly come back or shoot you an email with a better explanation.
It was more curiosity. It's their funding and they're paying for it, so I'm not going to worry myself about it. I was just curious. In many cases, tax credits are actual credits against federal tax obligations in return for doing something of public benefit. Restoring historic properties is one I'm familiar with. You get 20% of your investment in a 24-month period, blah, 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 and there's a formula. In some corporations, and those are usually saleable and transferable, some corporations have been known to donate those and then take that as a write-off rather than market those tax credits. I think that's what's going on. It doesn't really matter, but I was curious. So, I did want to also ask, though, there's just a fine point in the language about the facility would be for people who have experienced homelessness, I think is what the paperwork said. I'm assuming It's really for people who are experiencing.
Yeah, and more specifically, chronic homelessness.
Okay.
And so the state
So
has
somebody that 5 years ago doesn't walk in and say, "I used to be homeless."
No. It's for, and that was I should have put chronic homelessness in the packet.
Yeah, it was just that it said that they have, not that they are, or that they are chronically.
Yeah, and that is a requirement of the tax credit program, is that the individuals that are eligible for the program are deemed chronically homeless, and that's something that my office verifies. And again, the state has a definition of what chronically homeless is, and so they would come through coordinated entry. We would do the screening process, determine, what their past living history has, rental history has been. Again, verify that they're a resident of our community, and then when appropriate, refer to.
I'm going to guess you think it's consistent with the 10-year plan.
It is, yes.
So,
yeah, the biggest.
Chairman, I don't have any other questions. I'm good.
Yeah, I am also.
So Kyle, I got some questions. Are they also proposing to do this in Kennewick also?
Their diocese does not go to Kennewick, doesn't go into Benton County. So my understanding is that there hasn't been any conversations with I believe it's the Yakima diocese that covers Benton County. And so
the reason I'm asking is because we just talked about the Kennewick General, that facility with that many square feet. This is the perfect opportunity to maybe utilize that space instead of going into new construction.
Yeah, and again, I think part of this is that there's the only thing they've come to the county and asked for are referrals and for a request for us to sign that it is consistent with the housing plan. They fully fund it. I believe, quite frankly, that the 50 units, once it's built, we'll be able to fill it up, and then we'll need another one.
Probably need both facilities, not just one.
I believe so. It's the affordable housing is, again, in Benton and Franklin counties, the vacancy rate is between 1% and 2%. Yeah. So you have people that don't have barriers, and they have trouble finding something that's affordable. You factor in someone who maybe has people that typically are chronically homeless, by definition, they have a disability. So oftentimes they're mentally ill. They struggle with run-ins with the law, in and out. They have, when they've rented before, they can't hold city employment, and so they've got evictions on their record, and so in our community, landlords can be picky because there's this overwhelming need and lack of availability. So I think our community would be able to support both. And again, that's not saying that I know or believe that the proposed plan at the Trios is going to be viable. I think it's a great. It's got a lot of great potential, but
a lot of square footage.
A lot of square footage, and that's a little bit scary too, because there's a big bill that comes with that.
Exactly,
You're
that's
gonna
what I'm
have a hard
thinking.
time putting 50 housing units in Trios. So.
It would be more like 50 apartments, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think that's
because
how many we can have those conversations moving forward.
They're saying there's 2 floors, but there's more than one building, isn't there? Not over there.
There's a big complex, and I think they're just talking about the main campus right now. But I know I think it was called the Corrado Building, or there's some office spaces. That's all potentially.
Talking facilities that are more than half a century old.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that captures the concern.
Sure, I get it.
Okay.
So we want Keith's signature on that?
Yes, please. Yeah, and that I put his name on the the one you might have in your packet I think has the wrong date. I did. No, Keith has December on the one that he's looking at. Okay.
This is 114 on ours.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
And there's chronic is not mentioned in here at all.
It is not. That was just my what I prepared for you. I should have put that in there. That is a requirement of their program, and so that would be what my office would be screening for is the chronically homeless population.
All right, thank you, Kyle.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Authorize Keith to sign that. Is it a consensus?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.
With that, we are in our first item of public comment on our agenda. If anybody would like to speak to the board? Morning.
Good morning. Quick comment about the planning department in Franklin County. So I guess a little background. In the last 8 or 10 years or so, I've been in charge of 4 different construction projects in the North County for temporary labor housing. Every single one of those projects we've done through the Washington State Department of Health construction review services because they're far easier to deal with than our local planning department. Essentially, there's one building inspector that oversees temporary labor housing, and it's a pretty useful individual. They gave us a lot of good ideas. But in that process, I've learned that we're able to submit inspections with photos and videos and phone calls, and it's really efficient. I don't believe our local planning department does that. If I can honestly say I haven't been held up in construction one time in any of those 4 projects, so that's pretty cool. We've always been able to resolve everything with phone call.
Are you talking about the 4 temp labor housing projects?
Yeah. So there's 2
just
central support buildings that we've built.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that under state law, the county doesn't have a role in those projects. We're limited to setbacks and building heights, and they're almost entirely directed by the state. So I'm just pointing that out for people who may not know, because these meetings can be educational for everybody.
Right, but every time whenever I've gone to the county still looks at the plans, or the planning department does, and every time I've been in there, I've been encouraged, hey, why don't you do this at the county level for this reason, this reason, this reason. The planning department wants the business, and we hold off on it just because of the hassle of dealing with the local planning department. In prior projects before that, it's been less than fun, I'll put it that way. You get held up. And anyway, that's half of it. So just on that side, just the suggestion of opening up the planning department to being able to allow the inspectors to do more inspections via Skype, or we use a box account with the Department of Health. It works good for submitting paperwork or whatever else. It just saves everybody so much time. The inspectors don't always have to come to the site to look at, did you put in a hurricane strap or something like that. They can look at it and go.
First time I've heard anybody suggest that. That's actually a really good idea.
It works fantastic. And yeah, I mean, the last project that we did, I built 2 40 by 64 buildings, and the inspector was there on site one time in person. The one before that, where I built 14 bunkhouses, they didn't come to the site once, because we have a relationship where they can trust what I'm submitting them, and it works. So that's just an idea, you know. The other thing is we're building another project. We also farm in Oregon, in Lynn County of Oregon. We're building a 10,000 square foot agricultural use building there. In Oregon, it's only a land use permit. We don't have a building permit. And my understanding is it's that way throughout all of Oregon. So my idea for, I don't know if Franklin County can do this or not, maybe the planning department or somebody can look into this. This is awesome. There's not one building inspection in this entire process of putting up this next building that we're doing. So agricultural buildings, forestry buildings, livestock facilities, it's all exempted. I think I pulled up the law number for Oregon. It's ORS 455.315. So if Franklin County could do something like that, it would lighten the load of the planning department somewhat. I mean, you essentially self-certify your own plans. You know, I mean, you're still on that building, you're still engineered plans. And so on.
Well, in other words, you're taking personal responsibility for the building you're putting up.
That's correct. And in our facility, it might turn into a commercial facility. So we're still documenting with photos and videos and whatever else as we do it in case we decide to convert the facility later. But yeah, you self-certify the plans, and they're still stamped plans.
Mm-hmm.
You follow it as you go. It's just a building.
And you still got to put in for a permit, and you're still paying the
It's
county.
a land use permit, and essentially that way the county, Lynn County, gets the square footage of the building, and they can tax you appropriately.
Exactly.
Property taxes.
So they're still
Property
getting
taxes are pretty important at work.
Yeah.
So
Income taxes too.
yeah, in reality, we're considering expanding our packing facility here in Franklin County as well. And that would involve doing some different commodities and stuff, and it becomes much more attractive to build those facilities when you have less red tape through the local planning departments. So right now, for us, Oregon looks pretty good. You know, if we're going to, that facility is mostly for hazelnuts. Well, we have ideas, well, should we bring them back here and process hazelnuts here and send them out? Or really, when you're building facilities, Oregon looks a lot better than what Franklin County does right now. So, I don't know. I mean, it's not like it's the biggest deal in the world to go through the county, but it makes it takes longer, and it's just a little bit harder. And I don't think it needs to be that degree for agricultural use, if that makes sense. So I would like the county to look into that same exemption that all of Oregon has. That would be awesome. And I don't even know if it's possible, but if it
I'm
is,
pretty
that
sure,
would be awesome.
pretty sure it'd be a state law. Is it your perception that Franklin County is significantly different than any of the other counties in Washington on this issue?
I can't speak to that issue because I only farm here
Okay, all right.
in Lynn County, Oregon. But
Okay.
Lynn County is easier to deal with. And
So when I go to Wasatch and I meet with the other 39 counties, I hear a lot of the same feedback. So I think any significant change probably is at the state level, and I appreciate the suggestion that to look at how Oregon does it. I hate to admit that they've got a better solution, but they may have.
Well, it's good to deal with there. I mean, it's interesting. I drove back from Adams County yesterday, and there's signs whenever you cross the county line, hey, you have to have building permits for this and that. Evidently, you didn't have to do that in Adams County. I don't know. It's like mobile home permits and stuff. So clearly there's differences between counties. Is there enough leeway to exempt agricultural facilities, at least to some degree? I would hope so. I mean, I know you guys probably all know Jay Petty. Ask him about his experience of putting up grain bins with Franklin County Planning Department. It's crazy. It's crazy. But anyway, just a thought.
Okay.
If you guys could look into that, that would be awesome. I think it would expand agricultural facilities significantly to add something like that here, or remove something like that here. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Matt?
I'd just like to say it would be good to be able to talk to him, get his concerns. A lot of times we hear planning department, but actually where the concerns come in is really on the building side. And our state requires the county to adopt the international building codes as well as those things. So it would be good to understand whether we're talking about building code requirements or whether it's really planning issues. So that it'd be good to talk to you, have the opportunity to talk to you about that.
Okay. Any other comments? Morning.
Good morning. It's still morning. Honorable Chair, Board of Commissioners, my name is Roger Lank. I reside at 1817 North Road 76, Franklin County. I'm here to provide public comment on the proposal by the Kennewick Public Hospital District. I agree. The need is necessary. The entity is the wrong entity. Oh, I almost forgot. My friends in Benton County remind me I should check my wallet any time I'm in the room with a member of the Kennewick Public Hospital District. Anytime you want to find an organization which is worse run than Ben Franklin Transit, there it is. Jerry Martin and I were very involved with reviewing the Chapter 9 filing by Trios. It was and is a very ugly story. I will read from a January 2019 article which appeared in the Tri-Cities Business Journal about the situation. It starts off, no longer tasked with operating a large hospital, leaders of the Kennewick Public Hospital District are focusing their sights on how best to serve the community going forward, said Marvin Kinney, Commissioner and Board President for the Kennewick Public Hospital District. And that's going to mean partnering and being innovative. Translation, we need to figure out how to abscond with more of the public's money so we have something to justify our existence. Next, we are reminded the district collects about $1.3 million, it's now about $1.4 million a year through property taxes, with about 80% of this going to the New Orders of Trios Health. Tennessee-based RCCH healthcare partners bought Trios and Lord's Health in Pasco last year, but it merged with another healthcare system called LifePoint Health months later in November. After the payment to LifePoint, what remains for the district totals about $260,000 a year. Translation: Kennewick Public Health District, Hospital District has only $260,000 a year to pay its superintendent, executive assistant, and $61,440 to commissioners, not including travel, lodging, and conferences. Interestingly, commissioners' compensation increased 42% right after coming out of bankruptcy. Twice the pay of school board directors and equal to city council members, yet no responsibilities or function. Pay for non-performance. The article continues, and I'm sorry about Mr. Kinney's articulations. We're done running a hospital, but we have a district, Kinney said. We're kind of in limbo, but now we're kind of winding where we need everything and we can go forward. Sorry about that. The district's future could include any number of directions. As commissioners vet additional needs of the community that could benefit from the $260,000 a year above and beyond what is provided by LifePoint. He didn't even know that it's taxpayer dollars that are going to LifePoint. We have all kinds of ideas that everybody's thrown out. We've held workshops and had every commissioner say that we should do and what we should put together. So we're looking at having a facilitator help us with our mission and values. Sorry about the language, direct quotes. Explanation: we need some private-public partnerships in order to continue casting money into the municipal incinerator. That board approved long-term indebtedness exceeding its state-mandated maximum by over 100%. Next, it gave away over $261 million in public assets through bankruptcy, enough to build 11 new schools with matching funds in the Tri-Cities. Now they want our tax money for a study to help them figure out what to do next. All prospectuses warn past performance is not an indication of future performance. Kennewick taxpayers are acutely aware that for the district, past performance is a strong indicator of future performance. Let's not allow Franklin County to get involved with solutions in need of a problem, which will be carried out by a board which has the worst oversight record in eastern Washington. Let's listen to Nancy Reagan. Just say no. In your legislative call this morning, your lobbyist told you that the governor is, well, more than dipping into the rainy day fund to come up with some solutions for homelessness, and I'm sure this problem will be addressed in that. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further public comments? Seeing none, do we have some bills to pay, Commissioner?
Two items this morning: salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll, and the second is fund expenditures. Move for approval of salary clearing and emergency management payroll in total amount of $1,001,646.54. And note for the record, it's been reviewed and signed by two members of the auditor's office.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Second and final item, fund expenditures. Move for approval of fund expenditures as presented in the total amount of $308,215.38. Note that this, too, has been reviewed by two members of the auditor's office as well as the county administrator.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That brings us down to the consent agenda 1 through 3 today.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to request we pull item number 3.
Okay.
It's the RV park Host contract. I've been in discussions with them. They're in agreement with the terms of the contract, but I haven't received or obtained the final signed version from them, so I'd like to bring that before the board next week.
Okay. We'll pull item 3, so we have the consent 1 and 2.
Excuse me. Mr. Chairman, we have 2 consent agenda items remaining, and I would like to pull item 2 for separate consideration. Perhaps we could deal with that prior to voting on the consent agenda, as we may opt just to keep it in the consent.
That'll be fine, I think.
That's fine.
Okay, so with respect to item 2, this is the rental rates, fees, and charges for the Franklin County RV Park. I went through this again yesterday, and there's a list of things, actually. I'll try to be succinct, and if there are places where I'm too cryptic, anyone wants to ask for more detail, please do. But I didn't see any evidence that this had been reviewed by our civil legal staff, which is a real concern, given that a big driver in the changes at the RV park are, I'm told, as a result of seeking compliance with state laws. The rate sheet says that it's effective January 2020, January 1 or upon board approval of new pricing policy. It doesn't say, so I'm going to, I don't know if it's supposed to take effect upon board approval or if it's supposed to be retroactive. Retroactivity has proven to be a problem in a lot of arenas lately, and I don't think it makes sense here. On the fiscal impact block, there's a reference to quoting, and elimination of online one-night deposit. So the question is, eliminate the deposit or eliminating the deposit fee, because in the recommendation block it says, quote, eliminate online deposit charges. So was unable to decipher which is it. Are we not going to do online deposits, or are we going to eliminate the charges? On the fiscal impact block does not explain the impact, only the action. It doesn't tell us what the fiscal impact is, which is really what that block is for. What's the impact on the budget? It's an increase in expenses or a reduction. There's several more, and in fact, I'm about a quarter of a way through my list, and I think the questions get more difficult, not less. So, Mr. Chairman, my suggestion is it might be in the best interest of the county that we get some of these answered and this come back next week, or if it's a preference of the board, I'm happy to take the time to go through each one of these and ask staff to clarify and answer.
I had a number of questions also going through this, so I can agree with more.
I agree.
With more, look at it a little deeper.
I'd like to recommend then, Mr. Chairman, that each of the commissioners independently provide any questions or concerns we have to Mr. Johnson that we may not have provided in the past week, and give him an opportunity to maybe work with staff and refine this ASR and bring it back next week.
Yeah, agreed.
And if I may add that it says that this is prepared by and presented by Keith Wilson.
Right.
Is Keith present today?
He's not. It's not unusual. One of the items on the consent agenda for the
not to be present,
but that's.
I would like to have him present.
Sure.
I'd like to talk to him and ask him some questions. So we're going to remove
with
this.
that discussion in our consent agenda, we are down to item number 1, period.
Yeah.
Polling number 2 and 3 for further consideration.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just one other quick observation on this RV package. I just want to pull one out because I think it speaks to the level of detail that I'm looking for. Maybe others aren't. But they talk about discounts provided to patrons of the RV park if they are members of various organizations. And they specifically cite AARP, Good Sam, AAA, and military. Well, AARP is a nonprofit, don't have an issue with that. AAA is a privately held, but yet not-for-profit, don't have a problem with that. On the military one, it doesn't say whether it's for active duty, military, guard, reserve, retired, and it should because each of those are different. Or maybe it's all veterans, but it needs to be clear so that when somebody comes in, they know who is eligible, who doesn't. But the one, and this is the detail I'm speaking to, it may not be well known, but Good Sam is actually a private for-profit entity owned by Camping World. And so it begs the question of whether or not by furthering the goals and objectives of their organization and in promoting membership in that organization, we're potentially aiding a for-profit private enterprise. Happens all over the place, and I'm sure we're not the only publicly owned facility that does it. I use it to illustrate that, excuse me, we need more scrutiny on these ASRs, and it's why we have these things go through a civil legal review. In this case, I think we missed on both. So thanks for the additional time. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to move for approval of consent agenda item 1, noting that items 2 and 3 have been held for future work.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So that brings us down to you, Keith.
Yes.
Please.
While we're talking about the RV park, I'll just continue with that. I have scheduled a meeting with the park tenants tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. out at the Happel Center. We had this discussion before about the possibility of having some kind of a workshop or meeting with the tenants, with the commissioner present. We have not advertised that as a special meeting, and so I just want to make sure that if we're going to have a quorum of commissioners in attendance at that meeting, that we provide 24-hour notice of a special meeting. If it's just one member of the board attending, then I think we're fine to do it like we've planned it, but I want to make sure that I don't violate the Open Public Meetings Act when we have that gathering tomorrow night. So
No, that's fourth there. I don't need to be there. Come down.
Commissioner Didier indicated to me this morning that he would like to attend, and I heard earlier in the week Commissioner Peck would like to attend, so I just want to make sure that if I need to provide notice, I'm happy to do that.
Well, let me ask, do you feel that having a commissioner there is going to be productive to the discussion, recognizing that it may complicate your work as the administrator and may create perceptions of promises in the constituency? But I would be happy to have all the commissioners defer and just allow you to handle it if the board's comfortable.
Yeah, I'm good either way, as long as the commissioners understand that a commissioner can't speak for the board. I think you're well aware of that.
Well, and as far as you put it that way, because it relegates the commissioner's attendance to one of listening only.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I know members of the board have received inquiries directly from park tenants about the renegotiation of new contracts, the length of those contracts, and the terms of those contracts. Those are certainly legitimate questions we want to answer for our tenants and how that's going to impact their status at the park. And I think I'm perfectly capable of responding to those questions, but I don't ever want to be between constituents and the commissioners in terms of being able to hear directly from them or respond directly to them. So I'm
well, being that I was appointed to the track facility at the time, now it's the Happel Center, I was willing to attend the meeting. I didn't realize there was going to be constituents from the RV park till this morning, but I'm going to sit there and listen, and hopefully 2 sets of ears is better than 1.
Are we talking about the same thing? Is the track advisory board meeting and this meeting the same? I thought they were separate because these are separate entities. The Happel Center and its advisory board are one entity, and the RV park is an entirely separate entity.
That's in an.
Are we combining these meetings?
No, No.
So this isn't the HAPO meeting?
The meeting tomorrow night is specifically to meet with the tenants of the RV park to discuss their questions around their contracts.
And the RV park is
This-
not part of the HAPO Center.
Correct.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I've been waiting for the next meeting. I
The
thought that's what
HAPO
it
Center
was.
Advisory Committee meets quarterly.
And when is that next meeting?
I believe that's in February. I'd have to go back and look at the calendar, but
I'm
I'm
not getting the post on that either, so.
Didn't Tiffany just put it
I
out?
just got one.
Oh, we did?
It-
Well, I looked this morning and it wasn't there.
Okay.
All right.
So the HAPO it is,
Well, I don't need to be there. I'll trust you with it, Keith.
I'm good with that as well, Keith.
Okay. Next item, at the prior discussion of the board and the request of Commissioner Didier, is a proclamation of support for efforts of Pierce County in defense of Initiative 976. There are provided to you this morning was a revised version of this proclamation that was submitted by Commissioner Peck that I think speaks perhaps a little more clearly to our intent, but the earlier version that was initiated by Commissioner Didier is also, I guess, under consideration, but leave that to the board to decide if you want to support either one of those or have me redraft it and go from
Just
there.
speak to the reason that I submitted an alternative draft for consideration is that I observed some conflict at the recent WASAC meeting this past week on this and other topics where perception was created that County A was interfering with the business of County B, and it started to fracture a group that gets its strength from being 39 counties pulling together. And I thought that we could express the vast majority of the sentiments about the constitutionality and the initiative, and do so without invoking the names of specific counties any more than necessary. And so it's an effort to support the intent of the initial initiative without putting ourselves potentially in a wedge with other counties. So I did this because I thought it was a worthwhile thing to express our position. I'm happy to support the draft that I've provided. Obviously, I would not be able to support the other draft. So if the board prefers to go with the other draft, that's okay. It'll just be a...
Have you seen the other draft?
No. Well,
Just support for 9976 and the will of the vote of the people.
yeah, this one I have seen, yeah.
Are you in support of that?
Well, I have to agree with Commissioner Beck about involving the other counties in the verbiage.
The other counties being the county that,
Garfield, Pierce.
well, Garfield filed the suit and Pierce has filed a motion to intervene.
And so my point was simply to say that Franklin County supports constitutional due process, the initiative process, Section 2, Article 1, where the right is reserved to the people, and that rather than take a position saying we agree with Pierce or we agree with Garfield or anyone else, we let the courts do what they do and decipher. If I don't think that the will of the people...
Are you aware of Island County?
So I don't think that the will of the people is prejudiced in any way by us allowing the courts to render a decision as to whether or not the process was constitutional. I think they'll find that it was. I think that the suit brought by Garfield County will likely fail, but I don't see wisdom in this board weighing in taking sides when our real focus is that we support the initiative process and the Constitution of the State of Washington, and we can do all that without weighing in and taking sides.
Island County filed a
Amicus curiae?
Amicus, friend of the court, in favor of King County. So there's a county that's already joined in with King County, and what you're telling me is that we don't have enough courage to join in with Pierce County.
Well, Mr. Didier, if you choose to interpret what I call wisdom, lack of courage, then
Yes, I do.
As a new commissioner to the board, I'll give that due consideration.
I'll humbly say, yes, I do.
So what's the pleasure of the board?
So Keith, you wrote this as a referendum.
No, it's a proclamation.
Proclamation. There's no number on here. Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the proclamation supporting Pierce County and the will of the people in this proclamation so printed, so presented.
Mr. Chairman, point of order, I think we need clarification as to what version Mr. Didier is speaking to. If he means the one first presented and drafted by himself, it would be nice to have that clarity.
It's the one I got in my hands here. Proclamation in support of the Washington State citizens' constitutional right to initiate a referendum. You want me to read the whole thing to you?
I'd like to see the copy and be sure. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, it appears that that version is the one that I presented to Mr. Johnson. And assuming that's correct, then I'm happy to second.
Which version do we have then?
I take it to be the version that I created using the benefit of the initial one drafted by Commissioner Didier.
Do they have both versions?
I don't have to review the decision. I gave it to Commissioner Davis, but Commissioner Cook has not seen
It does list down at the bottom, now, therefore, the Board of County Commissioners of Franklin County do hereby proclaim and or support for the efforts of Pierce County, the state of Washington, and all entities defending the state constitution, the initiative process, and the rights of all Washington citizens. Sounds great to me. You wrote that. You did a great job.
Well, thank you, and I wrote it so as not to agree with Pierce County's position in the lawsuit, but to reaffirm their support of the Constitution and initiative process.
So it looks like we have a motion and a second.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Cook, or Mr. Peck seconded it.
Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
The last item I have, I had expected this to be held in executive session, but I believe we can have this discussion in public if the relative parties are agreeable to that. I think they are. There has been some discussion, Commissioner Peck referred to this earlier, around two resolutions that were adopted in April of last year relative to cost of living increases for myself and for 5 of the elected officials. Our understanding at the time, when I say our understanding, my understanding, HR office's understanding, and I believe the Commissioner's understanding at the time was that those were to be applied only prospectively, not retroactively. The Auditor's Office, in interpreting the language of the resolutions that were adopted, had a bit of a different understanding of that, and so the application within the payroll system essentially applied those as of January 1st to be consistent with the cost of living increases that were granted to other non-bargaining employees. That has resulted in a divergence of opinion about the application of the treatment of those adopted resolutions. The prosecutor's office has taken a position that resulted in payments that are retroactive and in violation of the state constitution. The auditor's office has taken a position of those being consistent with prior practice and consistent with what they thought was the language of the resolution. So we obviously have a clear difference of opinion into what should be the correct application of what the board passed. Having said that, I don't want to speak for the prosecutor attorney's office or the auditor's office. They're both here. It looks like a couple of the other elected officials that are affected by this are here. I would certainly want the board to consider their views. My personal viewpoint is I recognize I have a personal interest in the outcome of this, and my opinion has been more in line with the prosecuting attorney's office, even though that probably has a negative impact on me personally. But in the interest of disclosure, I want that to be on the record that I'm aware of the personal impact here. But having said that, I believe this is a situation that is ripe for some independent review, perhaps from the state auditor's office, to take a look at the interpretation of the plain language of the resolutions that were adopted and the way we applied them, and provide guidance to make sure that we have not initiated any kind of improper payment to anyone in the county. And if we have, then we seek a process for recovery of that. But if what we have done is appropriate, then the state auditor's office can review that and let us know. I would say the state auditor's office has reviewed, in terms of our past practices, those transactions. They've not declared those to be improper. So I think both sides, or all sides of this issue, have a reasonable basis. I don't believe it's politically driven or personally driven, but I think they all have a reasonable basis for drawing the conclusions that they have. I feel obligated to follow the guidance of our prosecuting attorney as the county's legal representative. I don't feel like I have the obligation to, or I don't have the authority to either question or subvert that legal opinion. So I realize that ultimately this is first a decision of the Board of Commissioners, but then my recommendation to the board is to allow the state auditor's office to weigh in on it. And with that,
so the agenda item for today then is a decision from the board as to whether or not we want to have the state auditors look at this?
Correct.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to quickly inject before we hear from others. I've given this a fair amount of thought, as have many other people. I think it comes down to three things: law, equity, and legislative intent. And it's important to have clarity as to what the intent of the legislative body, in this case of the Board of Commissioners, was when those resolutions were approved, irrespective of the plain language of it. If the legislative intent was clear from the recordings and other sources that it was to be or not to be retroactive, then that should be of significant importance to us. Secondly, with respect to equity, I don't want us to be in a position of doing for one group of employees what we're not willing to do for another. However, we do find ourselves sometimes in a position where we've bargained with units in the employee sector who might receive a pay COLA at a certain date or time, but at the same time have given up something else in the negotiating process. And so equity still remains, even though you're maybe treating two groups disparately with respect to when a COLA starts, because that bargaining group may in fact have given something up. So equity doesn't necessarily mean black and white, doing exactly the same thing for everybody. Third is the law, which I'll allow the prosecuting attorney to speak to. The fact of the matter is, for many years, Franklin County paid employees in advance, which I understand was not lawful. And when we determined that we were doing that and it wasn't proper, we set on a course to correct it. I don't recall any of us asking employees to reimburse the county for the time value of money for being paid early for years. So there's a whole bunch of good stuff in there for the legal experts to chew into, but I thought it'd be good just to start with the notion that legislative intent, equity, and law, and see where it goes from there. Thanks for the time.
Yeah. I also feel that I think this thought of letting the state auditor look at it and come up with a answer for us, I think, is prudent.
Yeah, I could be in agreement with that. But one thing I want to ask is, on these resolutions, this one here in particular, are these not a binding contract with the COLA increase? Is that not it's a contract with the personnel of the courthouse for salary, correct?
The elected officials and myself are not a contract with the commissioners, if that's what you're asking.
But we're responsible for your salary increase.
Correct.
Okay, so
right.
With that in mind, shouldn't these all be reviewed by the PA before they come to us and make sure that they are legally written correctly? Because this one obviously has so much confusion. We are at odds with one another in the courthouse right now. It seems like that
we've
there's
had
a lot of conflict.
Clearly several discussions about getting legal review before resolution are brought before the board, and I have no objection to that.
I think it would be best.
In most cases where we've dealt with compensation, we have not felt that to be necessary. And understand that this is a bit of a unique scenario because of the payroll study that we had done. It was decided by the board to take the elected officials off of the salary schedule and not necessarily treat them differently, but treat them as their own group, as it were. And so historically, when COLAs were granted to the non-bargaining employees, they went with the elected officials as well. But because that group was then separated out.
And this resolution was written to salaries consistent with the non-bargaining employees. This is what I'm talking about. Right. Consistent means the same as in my book.
Yeah, and that's why I say there's reasonable people that differ on what that language could mean, I suppose.
Well, and then they also list the salary right here, and therefore be resolved, and the number
I don't think that's the question. The question is, when is it going to be applied?
Yeah, there was clearly some discussion in the meeting of asking whether these were retroactive back to January 1st or not, and the response was that was not the intent, was to make them effective upon the date of the resolution. And
forgive me, but I just want to inject quickly that if an action requires the approval of the Board of Commissioners, the action cannot be lawful or approved until the board has approved it.
Correct.
And the date that the board approves something is the earliest date that can take effect unless the language of the resolution specifically modifies that. In this case, unless it says consistent with some other group or says effective on the 1st of January. So I think it's inherently understood that the date of approval of the resolution is the date that the action can start unless it is clearly articulated in the language.
And it is. It says to salaries consistent with the COLA granted to the non-bargaining employees for 2019.
And I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, Commissioner. In fact, I may be agreeing. But I think the subtext below that is that consistent with doesn't necessarily say consistent with the start date. It could be consistent with some other component of it, the amount or the nature.
And it should have then said prorated then to this number in accordance to the 9 months remaining. It should have had another clarifying.
Exactly.
This is why this is not written precisely enough.
Whole question.
Yes.
So
we're in agreement. Which is why I think we need some. I certainly would love to hear from the auditor and the prosecutor.
I think anybody that's been here since I have, that they've heard from me numerous times that I don't like retro. period.
I appreciate this open discussion on this. What I want to start with, there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of time put into this over the of what to do, which is to do what is right on behalf of the county. I disagree with the material representation that this was paid back to January 1st. So the way this was written, we interpreted it as though the board has the power to set salaries. And the other detail in there, the way it was interpreted was, it says at the top year end, and it has a start date, and the question was, how do you get from the start date to that year end balance? And the fact that we had done that in past practice means we could have either used a lump sum and level payments, or you could just increase higher payments and then have to make an adjustment at the end. This whole process was done by the accounting staff. And they've done it. Unfortunately, Tom and Tim are not here today to speak to it. It would be interesting to hear them as well because, there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of meetings with the different electeds that are affected. And, I appreciate that everyone here is attempting to do the right thing, and it's an important issue as it deals with people's pay and whether the county inadvertently violated the law. If it's determined this action must be taken to either try to recover it after the SAO looks at it. In our discussion, Tim and I attended a discussion with the PA, and we mentioned past practice. And it was mentioned by one of the staff that we need to look at the past resolutions as well. And, of course, that caught us by surprise because we assumed we were in compliance then, and it all seems to turn on retro pay. Well, what we need to do is if we're going to go ahead, and I completely support going ahead on this, but if this was done improperly, this needs to be made right to the extent that the law allows us to. And unfortunately, that would involve the 2014 resolution, which clearly does have an effective date prior to the approval date. And while we still would argue that we implemented that correctly, if we're going to send that, I think we need to send that for a review as well. And unfortunately, and I'm sure the PA's office is aware of this, the PA and all of the non-bargaining staff are affected by that. That would be a huge undertaking and compounded from 14 forward if we made that same violation. And they're all financially impacted, and if the law was broken on that resolution, that creates a conflict of interest for them and a potential ethics problem if they are making a decision regarding something that affects their own pay. So this is essentially Pandora's box, but if it's deemed that we need to go into it, absolutely. I think what we had here was a situation where we've worked on a resolution, and I'm sure some of these guys will speak to it, but the way we thought it was and the way we received it was there was no direct mention to not pay back to the start of the year, and we believe because the board has the authority to set salaries, you can choose to pay each of us differently. You can choose to do it in one day. Now, granted, there's reasons to and not to do it, but the authority is there. And so we implemented this in good faith. And, yes, if it was implemented incorrectly, potentially 2014 was implemented incorrectly as well. And I believe we should refer that to the state AG since, we would have a conflict with our own PA because he was included in that group, as was all of his lawyers. So that's my input on this. I absolutely want to do the right thing on this. And if you didn't intend no retro but a year-end pay that would be the same as everyone else, which is you have the 2.5 and you have an end number. What I'm understanding is that the pay, what it was being suggested is that the pay that we should have paid is nowhere in the resolution. And the percentage is, in fact, at a year-end basis, less than what's there. So in the defense of my staff, as we implemented this, this was not clear. And the question is, I do support the idea as we interpret these going forward, that we would have these all reviewed for intent, because absolutely, I don't believe we, while the calculation is on an annual basis, we fully expected that the authority was there for the county or for the guys to do that, and that's what you did based on the plain writing of it. So that's all I have. I don't know if either of the other gentlemen want to speak to it, but clearly I agree with the assessment that if retro pay was made here and it's deemed based on the review, the question is around the interpretations of the review. I mean, that's one of the reasons the elected group proposed a clarifying amendment to the way we thought we did it. And so, I think an AG's review and a review of both of these amendments there may be others. I did ask MRSC on the scope of this. I asked MRSC on our ability, just so that we know. Two heads are always better than one, so anytime someone else in the state has been through this. So, and I know you guys are taking this very serious because you were quoting laws back to the late 1800s. So clearly, if we inadvertently did this, we need to pay it back.
So, Mr. Beaton, if I may, just a question. Why would you propose referring this to the AG's office and not the state auditor's office? The state auditor's office does this kind of work routinely and consults with the AG's office on legal matters.
Completely agree. The state AG is to know whether we should include the 2014 in the. It appears to me, and I applaud Jen and Sean for bringing this to our attention, because when we mentioned in the meeting, this is the way we've been doing it. She asked for the resolutions and said we may need to calculate all the way back to these past resolutions. To which I said, well, we've been in disagreement on this. And so as we looked into it further, if that's the opinion, we do need to go back and look at this. But it's an enormous undertaking. The reason the AG would be involved is because the PA would be personally financially impacted by trying to recover 5 years of a retroactive that's against the Constitution, as he said, to avoid a conflict of interest.
Well, I agree that the AG's office likely should be involved in support of the SAO work. It just seems appropriate to refer it to the SAO, not to the AG's office. Maybe that's a distinction without a difference. Sounds like we're pretty much on the same page.
Well, I get it. I think, if the reason we're sending this 2019 to the SAO is a legal opinion, then a legal opinion needs to be passed on whether to do the same for the 2014 to the SAO. Because, and again, there's a big difference on the impact to the groups that are involved.
When was that? Some legal statute of limitations or something, I would agree
right,
with that.
And that's what we've asked MRSC if they've got something. And we also asked MRSC going forward. I mean, this is not something that the auditor staff, wants to be in the middle of. I mean, people say that it was not clearly written. Well, we argued actually it was very clearly written, and that you did not want retro pay. You guys, the board has the ability to pay a consistent COLA without retro pay. And it was a COLA that was not more than anyone else, and it was the same, for all the groups. And so that's the way we looked at it. We're like, well, they have the power to do it, and in the past, there must have been an issue on this, and you guys had a long discussion about not paying it. And I think that's the distinction, was that even though there was all these discussions around it, when the resolution showed up and it's read by itself, it's pretty clear. 2019 salary would be what it is, and it would start from this date. So we just are trying to determine how to get there. So
on that 2014 resolution that everyone's speaking of, when was that passed? What month?
I don't have it in front of me. I thought it was in either September, and then all I noticed was that it has an effective date prior to the approval date, which is retroactivity.
It covered the whole year?
Yeah. And that was a past practice that maybe the county was unaware of. you ask Tom and Tim, and they'll tell you, we had no idea. We believe there was some kind of a connection there, and that it was fine. And I'm telling you right now, if you're asking me and my staff, we would contend and still contend that there's no problem here. Clearly, in retrospect, the PA has read this and said, no, you applied it improperly. And then we're saying, it begs the question, where was the assistance in writing this legally? And even the folks that were affected by it, whether it's us or any other group, if it wasn't plainly written, there may have been a question, hey, why, when you have the power to give a similar COLA, are you giving us a less of a one? And, we may have asked that. Any group would, right, when you're disparately handled. But we got to do the right thing on this. So if you guys decide to send this, my recommendation is, the only reason you go to the AG is to make sure you include it. If you want to include both resolutions to the SAO, I guess you could do that as well. Again, Keith and I had a conversation on the SAO in that it's a reporting agency and has no enforcement. It would review it, and has been the case on, doesn't matter what it is, if, whether it was the last one, I think, whether it was the last one in the commissioner's office or other issues, if we take that report and we pay for it, and we'll be charged for it, are we going to use it? I support using it if we need their objectivity to make this determination.
I think going forward, we need to have our PA read over these and sign off on them before they come to the Board of Commissioners to make sure that everything is legit and legal.
So just a comment on past practice. I think reasonable people can agree that past practice gives an indication of possible intent. But past practice has no binding authority from a legislative body. Just because we've done it this way in the past means utterly nothing going forward beyond that reasonable people, if they have a question, might look to past practice as a way to gauge their actions going forward. I would much prefer that if there's a question, rather than making an interpretation based on past practice, that they raise the question and run it by legal or other authority and determine what in fact was the intent of the board. Past practice is understandable, but legislative intent is better divined, I think, from listening to the recordings of commissioners sitting up here and what we actually said with respect to intent. And if it's still not clear, then certainly other avenues are available. But I understand why people would take actions based on past practice. Doesn't mean they did something wrong. It means, in my mind, that they made a diligent effort to do what they thought was best, and it may or may not have been what was intended. But, again, past practice is not bound up or supported by legislative intent or authority.
For our part, the term past practice is to describe what we did. It was very, we didn't think there was a reason to go to anybody else. We had the internal discussion for us was, do you do a lump sum or and equal payments, or you do an increased payout? That was, so the past practice wasn't, is this a retro or not a retro? Based on this, it couldn't have been a retro because it was effective the same day as the approval date. So, we didn't have the authority to pay a retro, nor do we believe we did. And so, that's it. And, that discussion came up for us was that in these discussions, whether you have a retro payment, a back pay, a lump sum, a lot of times we use these, or people, that are not in the business or in accounting or in any other thing, you will loosely use these numbers. And whether we call them retro pay, they're easy to explain away by saying, no, it was a lump sum and here's why. And so I throw that in there to say, as we've tried to look back and try to say, well, how did this happen? What was our actions? What was the intent, of us, and everything else? That's where it came out. So, again, thank you for having this discussion in an open meeting.
shortly. I'm new at this. So I agree that what's happened in the past, we've got to come to a point where we stop it and we correct it, and forward we go correct. Now, whether this is sending it to the state to have them review it, or as a board you say, from this point forward, we're going to go this way. I agree that the PA needs to look at these things and have them see what the intent is. That's what their specialty is. Whether payback is necessary, or we say from this point forward, when I read it, I said, okay, this is how much at the end of December 31, I'm going to have this much put in my bank account. Whether it was as of January or whether it was as of, I think it was April, I think we need to know that we can't come back 8 or 9 months later and say, oh, that wasn't our intent, we made a mistake. We're professionals here. That's what we're supposed to be. The PA's office has those degrees. They understand the lingo that I don't. In my elected office, we don't need to understand this kind of lingo to take care of our business. So I'm supportive of whatever needs to happen. I want it done correct. And I'm willing to do whatever is correct. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no other conversation on this, I'd like to request about a 15-minute executive session with the board, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Beaton, and our prosecuting attorney, and also our HR director on this particular subject. And it comes under the whatever the RCW that speaks to litigation, potential litigation. There, I think, are some considerations here that are not proper for public discussion at this time, but may in fact be a worthwhile consideration to bring us to a conclusion here.
With all due respect, Mr. Commissioner, I would ask that we first have an executive session without Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson indicated as well that he would be part of the affected parties. The board is the client here, essentially, and I think it'd be important to discuss with legal counsel first, given an overview of our legal examination of this particular case, and then I think it could be appropriate to invite others.
Well, I'd be happy to amend the request then and just make it the prosecutor and the board, and I think we'll very quickly determine whether or not additional parties need to be brought in.
Well, with that, we will go into executive session, but give us, yes. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll get the public comment.
I appreciate it. I promise I'll be short and nice and won't be taking up 20 minutes like I did last time. Commissioner Peck, you were referring to, I'm going to the RV Park Resolution 2. You referred to Good Sam's and as a for-profit, which, trust me, he's got a lot of money.
I'm sorry. I recognize you, but you're
my name is Alec Gay. I'm from Franklin County Park RV. I live there. I'm in Space 30, and I apologize for not identifying myself.
No, that's okay. I thought that's who you were, but
Hey, you know, the face goes with the body. What can I say? But Good Sam's, and it's like AAR. I mean, you talked about AAA and all these other folks. Mm-hmm. Somewhere in there, they're making money. That's how they make their money. Good Sam's charges a yearly amount, but that also goes with insurance and other things. But
I spent a fair amount of time researching all four of those groups. Some are for-profit, some are not. I have a problem with the ones that are for-profit. Where the money enters the stream, I don't care.
Okay.
No offense.
But you're forgetting one thing.
What's that?
Free advertising. Good Sam's advertises this park.
That doesn't overcome the fact that we are contributing to the business model of a for-profit.
What's the discount you get? My argument is, or my discussion is, I don't want to argue because I want to be nice today. Tomorrow is a different story.
Okay.
Any of these places that even charge that you all give a discount to, you're not thinking of all the free advertising. If you go to Good Sam's,
let's assume there's $1 million a year worth of free advertising. It doesn't change the fact that we have a legal prohibition on contributing to their profitability.
What's the
Sure.
backside of the cost of losing that revenue as far as
Doesn't
advertising?
matter, even if the county loses money. I'd advise you to seek legal counsel on it. I've researched these groups. I'm not saying that that's something that is high on our list that we have to go fix. In fact, I pointed it out as an illustration of the level of detail and scrutiny that I'm asking for in these packages, not as a problem that needs to be
There's
fixed.
more than Good Sam's, though. There's other places that they give discounts to that are also, they generate dues from other folks.
Well, that concerns me. What are they?
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
Because, I mean, I have,
Because I've researched everyone on the list. Spent quite a lot of time doing it.
Perky Parks, I think, is another one. Not to sound stupid, but there's, if you go online.
No,
you will-
that we give a discount to?
I'm just speaking about those other places
Don't
that
care
advertise.
about what
your-
they do.
But see, I was, Good Sam's brought me here with the recommendation.
I'm sorry?
Good Sam's Club brought me to the Franklin County Park RV, first with being listed as a 5-star.
That's fine. But it doesn't get around the point that Good Sam's is a private, for-profit organization, and if we want to give discounts and promote Good Sam, then we ought to run it by our civil folks and make sure that we're clear to do that. But again, I was highlighting that as a level of scrutiny and detail I'm looking for in staff work, not as a problem we need to run out and challenge.
I'm good at doing research. I'll get back to you on that. Next thing.
Okay.
You mentioned all the different rate changes or not charging for the deposits and what have you. How were those researched? Bringing up your analysis. How were they brought? Because, I've never spent a night in an RV park where they didn't have a clawback. You have to be able to recoup your money somewhere. And if somebody says, I'm going to take that spot, and then all of a sudden in the 12th hour they decide, we're not going to go, we're going to go down the road a little bit further, then you have an empty spot.
Excuse me once more. This is a public comment, not a discussion or a workshop.
Well, I understand.
And it's also the purpose
my
for
next
the
question,
meeting
I'll
tomorrow
go.
night.
We sent you a letter following up to our last time we were here about a workshop on the park. Nobody got back to us. Except
See,
for
a workshop is for the board. There is no public comment in a workshop. Period. Never has been.
And we did schedule a meeting, as I suggested, for the county administrator to meet with the residents of the park, and that's happening tomorrow evening. That's the appropriate place for this conversation, candidly.
So a workshop is just another meeting between y'all, without anybody else interjecting their opinions or anything.
That's the way they're set up.
Right. Which is why we've scheduled a meeting tomorrow evening for the residents and the county administrator. So you have that opportunity to ask and answer questions back and forth.
You also have the opportunity next week to come to the county commissioner meeting when these are going to be back on the docket at the public comment.
Thank you.
So with that, let's take 5 minutes while we're closing the door and restroom break, and then we'll get started on our exec session. Thanks. Yeah. On tax.
Speak up, Sean.
Yeah, I'd like to go into, I'm asking the board to go into an executive session under 42-30-1101I, in anticipation of litigation, to meet with the board for a period up to 15 minutes. And this would solely be with the board members and the county's legal counsel.
You said 15?
Up to 15.
Okay. All right. Okay. We are out of executive session as we started, but we need to go back in for an additional 5 minutes under the same RCW.
We need 5 more minutes, Matt. Keith.
Oh, you do?
We need 5 more minutes.
Did we already go on the record for extending under the...
Okay, we are back into our open session with extended executive session with no decisions made. Say what?
He's saying we need elected with all the, so we're short one.
An exec with all the electeds? No, I think it's open to the public now, isn't it?
Hasn't been discussed yet.
When's our camera supposed to come online, Karen? But then again, it won't be on during the executive session, correct? It's only on during the public meetings.
I'll defer to the board. If the board wants to do that in an open meeting, a discussion about how to resolve that.
I don't know why we'd be in executive session. It's,
Well, based on the same basis for why we went into the executive session. When you have a couple people threatening litigation, that's what you got to do.
In this case, it's interesting. Yeah. No, we're back in open session, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll save the comments.
So I'm fine if the board wants to do that as well.
But then since we are on the record in open session, I would ask you to consider whether the executive session with all the electeds would be any more appropriate given two indications of potential litigation. It would be the same participants.
Resolving potential litigation with parties.
No, what I'm saying is that having a meeting in open session doesn't appear to propose any more risk than doing it in executive session, given that two of the parties in executive session are potentially adverse.
Right, and that's why during an open meeting, we would not be discussing any particular legal solutions. This would be just an open discussion with that in mind. We're not going to go into any kind of legal theory, risk, other issues. Completely consistent with that open discussion.
are the other elected officials coming in?
No, this is the other two, I don't know what people, some of those that last week.
Chelsea's at a bankruptcy hearing in Richland.
That's Virginia's.
Okay. All right, we are back in regular session. Sean, do you want to catch us up on?
Sure. In discussing with the board briefly, we discussed a couple options that could be a pathway forward. One option would be able to, the board could recognize that if there's an understanding that certain payments may have been interpreted to be paid in 2019, I think the cleanest way to resolve that issue, as pointed out, the board has authority to set salaries for all the officials within the county. One path forward would be to recognize that under our interpretation that payments from January 1 to April 8th would not be covered when the effective date of a resolution says April 9 going forward. The board could propose a resolution for 2020. We passed a similar resolution last week. The board could adopt a resolution for 2020 salaries that would include the amount in question to resolve that disputed amount, and the auditor's office could coordinate retaining the payment of the new 2020 COLA to collect that 2019 amount, but essentially it would put the individual affected elected officials back into the same position financially without having to physically repay a check. I recognize that might be complications with the 2019 salaries of individuals with their taxes and things like that. It was proposed one method could be simply to make it clean with repayment so that the 2019 books would be closed, but then the board could recognize passing a new resolution prospectively for 2020 that would include that questionable amount as well as the previously adopted COLAs moving forward. And that one basis for doing that would be able to resolve a dispute, allows everybody to go back to work. We could then submit a question, I guess, if there's a need for outside opinion. I disagree with the conflict based on the 2014 resolution. I am excluded from that resolution, so I do not believe I have any conflict weighing in on the legal affairs of these particular resolutions. I, the district court judge, as well as the TRAC temporary employees, TRAC at the time, the HAPO Center now, those employees were excluded from the 2014 resolution. We could certainly look at what I think there's a distinguishing difference between what was done in 2014, and we could certainly look at that different to make sure that we have the full picture authority moving forward. My recommendation to the board, obviously, is to look at these. We have a question that has been raised. If that question is deemed reasonable to the board, a path forward would be able to make a 2020 resolution correction that would consider that amount in question that was paid 2019 from January 1 to April 8. And we could certainly coordinate that amount with the auditor's office so that amount would be collected through the biweekly payroll deductions or whatever, so that we could clearly show that that amount is being recovered, and a new COLA as well as new salary rates could be adopted for 2020 going forward. That would be one proposal simply for the board's consideration that I think would be consistent with the legal opinions that we've reviewed from the Attorney General's office opinions, as well as the other relative
Mr. Sant,
cases.
if I may, I just want to capture this moment to clarify and make sure I'm hearing what I think you're saying. Is that a new resolution replacing the one we just passed, and the new resolution would set salaries and COLAs for electeds for 2020, and it would be some modest amount larger than the previous 2020 resolution, the one we just passed, and that the purpose of making that slightly larger is that the slightly larger increase would be enough to allow the county to recover the previous, what you believe to be unlawful payments, and do it without financial penalty to the employees who, for the remainder of the year, would actually see a larger COLA than is currently approved.
That's correct.
Is that accurate? Okay.
And I would just make one caveat. Before the passage of that resolution, I would want to ensure that we do have the agreement. We do have, I believe, 2 of our electeds that are affected that are not present. I would want to have unanimity on that decision to do that. But that would be one path forward that I think would be consistent with legal practice, in that we are going forward. This is a prospective salary setting, but it also contemplates, you can call it a legal dispute or a reasonable interpretation that is inconsistent with our office's opinion, but resolving that dispute and recognizing the amount of time that it would take to thoroughly flesh this out seems to outweigh the amount of controversy that we're talking about. So that would be
acknowledging that the best interest of the citizens is better served by a timely resolution as described than spending countless man hours hashing it out.
That would be one possibility. Okay. Yes.
With all due respect, I'm a little bit confused by what's said, and it harkens me back to even just that it reminds me of the resolution itself. I would say we should send this to the SOS as was proposed during the former meeting to find out if, in fact, because I'm confused by a lot of what's going on. I know we put together, the electeds did a resolution, and the question is, would this amendment to the original, solve it? And what really begs the question is truly, if what we're worried about is the retro payment, we really can't, if that's been brought up, we really can't let that go. If it really was wrong, and it was suggested in the meeting when Jen collected those, that the lump sum distribution and level payment might have been an indication, we do need to send those in. I mean, we need to do what's right here. This sounds like more of what got us into this, trying to get us out of it. And so, for my part, I still support everybody has, we're the honors office, and I've got an accountant that's in there for 30 years. I have one that's been with the SAO. They're the two that implemented this. And so, I appreciate the effort based on strictly kind of tying it through, Sean's feels very passionately about this legal opinion. And I appreciate that, and I appreciate that he brought up these other, had us look at these again to say, I wasn't even aware of the late 1800s law that was still in full force. And so if we have done something wrong, then yeah, we need to send this to the SAO. And if there's I'm not sure if they have a review mechanism for this at all, or maybe they just do it on a standard, audit, whether it's a performance or a financial. And granted, they've been doing that in the past. And like I was saying to Keith outside, the question is did the board knew they don't want to pay retro, but were you properly advised that there was a way to word that to give which is what I thought you did, my staff did anyway, that's what I'm here to say, is that to give a consistent COLA. And there most certainly was, and we believe that this proposed, and we can bring this back from us so that it's not from you guys, this amendment that basically lays that out. It takes responsibility for the fact that the way this was implemented, it says that it was unclear and that the PA had to rely on non-binding things to get there. It then it says what was in the deal. That verbiage was the same we used, which said you intended the non-bargaining elected officials to get the same COLA. That's what we got. You did not want retro pay. It says that in the bottom, and that's why we say we didn't pay it. And I know there's a difference of opinion on this, but I think the best route is probably the review by the. And the only reason, like I say, I think we need an AG's opinion is, and maybe we don't if it was read wrong, but then the non-barbs are still implicated in it. But it was more because you talked about a constitutional problem with paying before an effective date, and I know if there's a negotiation in there, and you could make that same argument here that there was a negotiation that ours was based on a prior, and so there's that same link. So I know that I like the idea of this. I don't really totally understand what happened there. It sounds like a lot of work for the auditor's office. That right now we've got to get 1099. That's one of the reasons I said, geez, if we launch into this, we may need to do an estimate and outsource some of this because we've got to get 1099s and then do W-2s and close the books for the year. And so, contrary to popular belief, that most hours in the accounting are very busy. So if we try to sit this in, this is a fairly sizable project for whatever solution is, and I hope we can come up with a solution that's,
Has Sean seen that resolution that you wrote?
I don't know. Yeah.
Would that resolve the situation?
No.
It would not resolve.
No.
Then it needs to go to the state.
Well, either needs to go to the state or the spirit of this be captured in you help them write something that says, look, we have the power to do this, and this is what we intended an equivalent COLA. Otherwise, as a group, you would have said to the group, including Keith, hey, we don't want you to have the same COLA. We have the power to give it to you, but we don't want to give it to you. Well, you had a discussion about no retro, and then you sent one over that accomplished what you said. You wanted a consistent COLA. And so, again, like my staff said, there was no discussion on proration. There was no there's nothing that said don't do this or lower amounts. So yeah, I think that if he feels this strongly, that we can't just come up with something that amends the original to say we didn't do retro. And
I think that's what he's proposed.
Well, but I mean, you're involved a whole bunch of other work, less or more. I don't know. Did you guys understand what he said? I'm not entirely certain.
I think I do. Yeah. He paid back the retro or the payment, however he wanted.
Yeah. We just replace the existing resolution with a new one at a higher COLA rate, and it pays it back.
Do we know? Wait a minute. We need to ask accounting though. I don't know the disparate. I need to talk to Tim on how that affects. For starters, it's going to affect us, and I can't imagine the number of hours. I don't know. It could be an hour. It could be more on trying to back all that stuff out. Because it's like when they left after talking to you, Bob, they went down to talk to you, and they came back upstairs, and they were like, oh, my God, you have to back that out on a cascading basis. And they're like, anyway, it's not just as easy as it sounds. At least Tim and Tom were standing there trying to figure out how we would do this if it came to pass. And so, again, I'm in support of, unless we can get that, I'm in support of the SAO review of it. That's where I'm at. Because anything less would imply and not really take responsibility for the wording. I mean, quite candidly, where was legal? Why? It's like we're attacking ourselves. I mean, legal is ultimately responsible for the content of the laws. At least this is a legal document. If it's not handed to them, they can't be responsible for it. Right, but now we're trying to do this retroactively to ourselves. So what happens, SAO gets a hold of it and comes up with the same solution that Sean did. It's going to cost us SAO plus auditor's time. Well, the big thing is what Jen brought up. I mean, we may have paid retro pay back to 14, and like she said, we've got to recover that if it was done illegally.
I think we're mixing up two different issues. I think you bring up a good point, and that's why I've told the board we will continue to review what was done in 2014. But as you may recall, in 2014, the other elected officials, except the county prosecuting attorney and the district court judge, were not in that group. They were connected with the non-bargaining groups. Consistent with previous AGO opinions, if you have an open-ended contract, your labor agreement, you don't want labor walking off the job from public employment. I understand. We've done a lot of research. I need to explain this, apparently, because the difference is in 2014, if the non-bargs were also authorized by the county's agent to negotiate a contract for both your bargaining units and your non-bargaining units, if that was the authority given, then you don't have what's called retroactive payment. You had what's called deferred compensation.
Wasn't that what happened here? I mean, you awarded something?
It's not. And the reason...
But we're the ones that implemented it based on what they wrote. That's what we believe.
Deferred compensation and get out of the site?
Hold on. If you want a legal opinion, I've met with all of you individually. What I want you to understand
is something's already happened. Something's already been implemented. And you're looking at something retro. And again, if you ask my staff, we had no idea that what we were doing, because you even made an attempt to change the verbiage from 14 to 19 to address the potential for retro. So in order, all these, and then you compare it to Keith's. Keith's actually doesn't have an effective date. We implemented that. We're talking about that. We got a whole other group. And just because Keith's willing to pay the money back doesn't mean there's not a potential liability associated with the way it's written. His has a January 1 similar date.
If you listen to what the proposal was, it's recognizing that those payments, as written and passed by the resolution adopted April 9th of 2019, you cannot go backwards from an effective date unless it's a situation where you're adopting a bargaining unit or something that was part of an ongoing negotiation where it was understood that a date was agreed upon at some point that would go forward. When you adopt you were legally obligated as an elected official and the other elected officials, you were legally obligated to perform that work for the term of your office. You cannot, under the state's constitution, you cannot go back and then change the compensation of work that was already performed. That was our legal opinion. What we are trying to do now is we're trying to resolve a legitimate dispute based on the arguments you've brought forward to the board just like we would do on any other case. We evaluate what do we do in the best interest of the taxpayers, what do we do that's legal, ethical, and our obligation as elected officials. What we can do is the board has authority to set salaries, period. The board could pass salary increases tomorrow for anybody they choose if they want to do that with proper notice and everything else. That's why we're having this open discussion, is resolving this dispute. The individuals involved would recognize that that payment from January 1 to April 8th was improper. We're correcting that by retaining funds coordinated with your office like you would on any other kind of garnishment or retention. You would withhold such amount that would be allocated with a new 2020 salary matrix.
Again, I'm not sure I understand what you've made all these decisions without consulting with.
No. I'm just saying this is simply a proposal that we have before the board to discuss a resolution going forward. We will still look at the other issues of 2014 and look at it once this was brought to us, and we'll look to make sure that there wasn't anything wrong. But I think it's consistent with what you've always said, which is we want to do the right thing going forward. And when something is in front of me and presented to me and it appears that this was incorrect, let's correct it. And now I'm proposing a method that we could do to go forward that makes everything transparent. It makes it very clear what the intent was. It makes it clear that we're trying to resolve a dispute that was brought up by yourself and a couple others of saying, look, we interpreted this to be this salary by the end of the year. I disagree with that, but let's just say it's a reasonable interpretation, and now we're trying to move forward as a county, and we're proposing a legal path to do that.
Your disagreement is your opinion of what we did and what our intent was. When I was in your office...
No. I said nothing about intent, Matt.
When I was in your office, well, there must be, there has to be in order to do this. But let me say this. When we were in your office, you said repeatedly, this needs to go to the SAO. You said to me, you turn everything into the SAO, and that this was a bigger impact than the LFO, and that the SAO needed to review this depending on what these folks did.
I said it needed to go to the SAO if you and the others interpret this any other way. If you interpret this some way that this payment was authorized, absolutely. It needs then to go to somebody else like SAO to make that determination. I'm proposing to you, which is a legal consistent position, which is I'm not saying that what was done in 2019 was correct. We're creating a remedy going forward. You would be acknowledging that that was an incorrect payment. If you disagree with that, then I guess...
I do. Because you're talking about the auditor's function. I mean, we should be collaborating on how to do this. You're passing a judgment from a purely legal standpoint. I mean,
Matt, I am not passing a judgment. No, you didn't let me finish. My job is to provide legal counsel to the board, legal counsel to those that bring it as a question.
As surely as he's the clerk, we know what we do in accounting. I mean, I have an SAO guy there, so I know what we did and the interpretation of it. Sean, it's right and it's defendable. And now you're going back in and you're saying, based on the way it was paid out, it's not right. And so you're kind of in our area. And so this needs to be sent to the SAO. And if we are going to do any action on it, no matter what anybody decides, we need to send it there. And that's what we'll do based on our meeting with you. And we'll send the 14-1 as well if your true concern is about retro payments and doing this improperly. I'll tell you what I think. I think what's going on is here we are arguing over legalese and interpretation, and he can do that, but the way we treated it in here, he's passing judgment. The auditors should look at what financial people do. And I don't know who's going to come in and say that was inappropriate, but you're going to do a bunch more accounting to affix a disagreement with accounting. And I don't know who the counterparty is here. Up there you said it's the people. If we weren't intended to get the money, we should pay it back.
Mr. Beaton, how do you propose we handle this in a way that minimizes pain and expense to the employees, the electeds, and the people of the county? What's your proposal?
That legal amend, you can amend I don't even know, actually, and that's why you should send it to the SAO.
You're arguing pretty vehemently for someone who doesn't have a proposal. Let me share my views.
The proposal, we put one forward.
Excuse me. I listened quietly to you. Please do the same for me. We had an executive session. learned some things there. Earlier, I suggested the SAO. I still think that that's possibly an avenue. However, I think the primary objectives need to be to ensure legal compliance. And at this point, I tend to agree that the resolution was sufficiently clear and that the interpretation in your office, while understandable, was not consistent with the intent of the resolution, and that the simplest, least cost, least pain to the affected employees and for the people of the county is to undertake a resolution, as Mr. Sant has suggested, and then ask the SAO at their next regular audit to review this for us as part of that audit so as to minimize cost and give us their view on it. That way we satisfy the majority of the concerns, we try to mitigate the overall cost and pain to the people of the county, and we take care of our employees.
So I heard you out, and I'm saying, and this has happened before, the way this is written, and they admit that it was confusing, and that's why they had to go to the other, that there's merit in the way that it was reviewed, and that's why you went to the additional stuff, because it wasn't clearly a deviation from the past.
Well,
and the reason I'm arguing on this on two pieces, not just me personally, but as an auditing function, and how we play in as advisors or anything else as an elected official. And so there's something more at stake, and that's why I think, the state auditors should be involved in this. If these, most of these gentlemen don't, they just want to be made whole. The question was about intent.
What more is at stake?
Well, I'm saying we're, based on legal's interpretation of what accounting did, he wants to go through a bunch more accounting, to comply, and I'm trying to figure out, is there no resolution that could amend the one that would say we're done with numbers? Because you're saying that's impossible to be written.
Well, one, I disagree. I've never said that there was questions about the resolution. I've always held, and I still maintain, the resolution as passed last April 9th of 2019 was clear. If that would have been sent to my office for review, we would have approved that as being the intent, effective date going forward. Now, the issue came up with these past events was because, from your standpoint, you said this has been always the way it has been interpreted in our office. I asked, if that's the case, can you provide references so we could look at that and see what is the past practice so that we could correct it? That is consistent with but it's far different for me to be saying to you, which I did not do. I didn't say we're going to start reviewing the other things. It was presented to me that it was interpreted consistent with past practice, even though it was interpreted differently than a resolution that was passed within less than a month later, where that annual salary compensation was not included for the calendar year of 2019. That being said, we're trying to propose simply a resolution. I think the proposal is trying to minimize cost to the taxpayer, still providing the SAO with an opportunity to weigh in on this so that everybody has an opportunity to figure out the best methods going forward, and we can do that. And that's the path that's been presented. I see that being no different than what you're presenting now as this new resolution that basically tries to undo what was done in 2019, which I disagree with because I don't think that the resolution in 19 was inaccurate or not clear. I think from talking with you and the other electeds, it's clear from your understanding there was a reasonable belief to believe that this would have been covered by 2019. So I'm giving you that bit, even though I disagree with it from the legal standpoint, and that's why we're trying to propose a 2020 correction with a 2020 resolution that recognizes the issue of
we implemented Keys. Keys was written completely different.
Keys was different. I recognize that.
And there's an issue there. I thought we had this solved before you went into executive. We were going to send this to the SAO.
Again.
As the accounting advisor to the board and to serve the people, and you've got a legal advisor talking about us, I don't know what the risk cost-wise to the county is. Okay, I don't understand who's going to sue us and what are we going to have to pay. This is an argument over the interpretation of our resolutions And so, in an argument, I asked you that, like, what is going on? I mean, we're having all this conversation. People's eyeballs are popping out. Why don't we just, we got the same as everybody else. That's what everybody thought you were trying to do. It was consistent, the way the language was written. So to continue to do this is creating work, and we should just throw it to the SAO. And I'll tell you what right now, whatever the SAO says, I personally will follow it. And I think we need to have them based on their deep concern about retro. We don't even have to call it retro. You don't pay retro, you raise it. But here's where I'm at. No matter what you decide, let's throw it to the SAO, no matter what. And for my part, in representing the people and advising you in accounting and all these things, we work with you on the budget. I mean, we count on them to write a budget for $100,000 and compile it, $100 million, or whatever our total is. And now all of a sudden, when they interpret this one thing, we've got to go do, I don't know how many hours of work in here.
Speaking, I would offer a friendly caution about holding up the merits of your staff and their accounting, lest you invite a list of occasions in which their judgments and calculations have been less than stellar. I was not going to go there publicly, but after about the fifth time of you heralding their expertise, I'm going to tell you, I think I've heard enough at this point that having the SAO look at it makes sense, but I think you do it as I suggested earlier. When they come here to minimize costs, we're still going to get the same answer, and that we move forward promptly with a new resolution to take care of the elected officials. I've listened intently, and with due respect, I hear what I think is more defensive pleas than I hear proposals or cogent arguments as to why our legal counsel is incorrect.
So,
unless I mistakenly missed your law degree.
The law is written actually for the people to understand, and the fact that we have to have lawyers based on the legalese and the big words, it doesn't have to be that way. But I will say this. I'm sorry that you're shared that. We could all sit around and talk about missed opportunities, and that's not what this is about. This is about leadership and trying to move the county forward with us. And I think at this point, what I completely agree before we got into this and I don't know what the urgency is. If the SAO says it's going to be the same amount of legal accounting activity or potentially less if they say, you know what, it's good. It was implemented the way it was written. Then we're good. Because then, despite a legal opinion, we got the same, Keith got the same, they were all written different. Heck, in the past, these things if you wanted us to get less, you could have put it in there. And I'm like, why didn't you just put it in there if you wanted us to get less? It was like written. So you've made your point, Brad, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate that you're, by the way, maybe through Keith, if you could give him some feedback on, my staff actually prides themselves. And we were, in fact, the pay issue was from all the way back in the 90s, and we got it done. And congratulations to the county for getting that set up correctly. But at this point, I say let's just send both of these over there, let the SAO look at them, and we'll do it today and say there's a dispute on how this is done. And when they come back, we can craft why don't we have the staff, you could meet with the staff on what is the most effective way to minimize the impact on accounting hours, especially going into the 1099 and in the W-2 season, as well as closing the books. So that's where I'm at on it.
I haven't talked to the others yet, but I like the proposal that's given. Commissioner Peck, I like your suggestion too. I hate to see the county spend $1 to find out that, we owe 10 cents back. That's just not financially right. I think we take the proposal that Sean said, we talk to the other elects, we decide if that's what we're good on. I'm good with that way. Put this thing to rest. When they come for our audits, have them look at it, not cause extra money and expense to the county. That's where I'm at with it. So if you'll allow us to talk with the other elects that aren't here, get back with you guys.
Please get clarity on what he's proposing.
Well, somebody should write up
Yeah, if you can
new
have something
resolution
written
that's
up so we
stating
can
what-
say it,
what the
whether
discussion is.
today,
Exactly.
tomorrow, so we
Have to
know
look at
that
the resolution.
everyone signs
If
off
I-
on it.
If I-
I think everyone's to the point we want to put this to bed
That's right.
and not cost more money. That's
How many
ridiculous.
hours have we got in it now?
Well, how many hours are we going to have in with the accounting on doing this 1/10 of 1% to pay, for them to pay back your money? How many hours are we going to have in this?
So,
How about this? How about we work, the county works with, whatever his concern is, you know, we get together with Keith and try to figure out, the accounting staff can get together and figure out what the least impact is.
Yes.
If there's going to be a reversal and all this kind of stuff, I don't know what it does to, you know, I don't know what it does. So I'm ready to say that. So if I can get, when Tom and Tim come back, if we can meet with him, Sean can say what I don't understand what exactly, you know, how we're trying to reclassify that and from yeah. So, I mean, there is a path forward, I guess, and I'm worried about if it's developed outside of accounting, you know, we may be doing things and they're going, why are we doing this? It doesn't even comply. So then we're going back and forth. So if we could come up with a solution based on the very narrow, I mean, maybe that's okay. I don't know. I haven't talked to them, but I mean, whether I don't know if it impacts.
We need to come up with a proposal and
Please
and
do.
If I may.
bring it to the.
And with the consensus of the 5 electeds.
yes. And put it to bed. The accounting and everything else, that's kind of like peas and carrots. They're just not mixing.
Yeah.
So let's keep everything in one basket,
Yeah.
have this portion of it resolved, and then the other can be done.
Okay. Does that
Thank
sound
you.
like a path forward, Sean?
Sort of. Sean, once you draft that resolution, would you coordinate that with the legal staff, please?
If I may, just to summarize, I think it's important to recognize that the purpose of the upcoming resolution is to resolve a legal dispute. It is not to address or specify or characterize the actions or interpretations of the legal
I would have to
staff
say a
of the county.
potential legal dispute. There's no legal dispute right now.
Potential.
I think somebody had the floor, and that's enough interruptions.
Yeah, well, come on, guys. What is going on around here? This is bizarre. There's no legal dispute. There's a question on
Somebody had the floor.
I think you said potential.
Yes. Clearly, there's a difference of opinion. If that's not a dispute, then I need to go to law school or something. But there's a difference of perspective, however you want to characterize it, that affects individual employees and affects the county. And so the purpose of the resolution is to resolve that difference in a way that's legally defensible and minimizes the impact of the people that are involved and allows the county to move forward with business. Having said that, I don't think there should be an expectation of the accounting being so involved that it comes to an exact number, but it becomes a reasonable, much like you would resolve a legal dispute of an offer, a negotiated settlement. This would be a reasonable reasonable calculation of the impact. That's a fairly simple, straightforward number to determine what the impact for both 2019 and 2020 would be, to be able to put the appropriate amounts into a resolution. And as long as the expectations of the elected officials, and I will speak for myself, is that accounting is not so specific that it requires hours and hours of staff time to calculate that. That's a fairly simple calculation.
Okay. Further comment?
Just want to let the air cool down a little bit. I concur with the coroner and with Sean. We need to get this put to bed. I do think we need to have the SAO look at it, our next audit, to save the taxpayer a lot of money. Curtis and I don't know if Matt is going to meet, we can all meet together with the other two elected officials, and then we can move forward and let Keith know what our consensus is, if that works for the board.
That's what we're heading for at this point. Anything else? It's our final period for public comment on the agenda. Hearing none, I think we're done with executive sessions. Anything else for the good of the board? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.